Chapter 1069. Mo Suiyun returned to his room and immediately closed the door. He lifted the quilt and stuffed himself in, hiding under the thick brocade quilt and trembling. He wasn't a particularly smiling person, but he believed that all his brothers and sisters had the same deep impression of this Uncle Li. In the palace in Nanjing, they saw with their own eyes how Mo Jingli tortured Mo Suiyun. And his malicious eyes that swept over them from time to time, each of them left a deep shadow on Mo Suiyun, who was still young at that time. Mo Suiyun trembled fiercely and hugged the quilt even tighter. Just now he clearly felt that Mo Jingli wasn't just scaring him but really wanted to kill him. No, I can't die. I can't die. Mo Suiyun whispered, "What should I do? What should I do? Deceive Mo Yuchen out and let Mo Jingli kill him?" Mo Suiyun shook his head fiercely. Although he didn't like Mo Yuchen and subconsciously regarded him as a future enemy. But now, he wasn't qualified to be compared with Mo Yuchen and the Prince Ding mansion. Therefore his current enemy was definitely not Mo Yuchen. And Prince Ding, that terrible white-clothed and white-haired Prince Ding. If he killed Mo Yuchen, Mo Suiyun couldn't help but tremble again. No, he absolutely couldn't provoke Prince Ding. But what should he do? "Who wants you to die?" A laughing voice came into his ears. Mo Suiyun was startled, and after a long while he suddenly lifted the quilt and saw Mo Xiaobao sitting by the bed and looking at him curiously with a smile. "Why are you here?" Seeing Mo Xiaobao, Mo Suiyun's face suddenly turned pale. He quickly got up and wanted to see if there was anyone outside. Mo Xiaobao tilted his head and smiled. "Don't worry, there's no one outside." Mo Suiyun breathed a sigh of relief, staring at Mo Xiaobao silently. Mo Xiaobao didn't care, sitting leisurely and looking at Mo Suiyun, who was standing by the bed in a daze. Actually, Mo Xiaobao also knew that compared to Mo Suiyun he was definitely considered fortunate. At least he had grown up happily under the protection of everyone, unlike Mo Suiyun, who had grown up in fear and trepidation in the harem. Now he was being manipulated like a puppet by the courtiers and nobles of Dechu state. Under such circumstances, Mo Suiyun was still able to carefully conceal his thoughts. It was no wonder that Lord Father would look at him in a different light. Mo Suiyun was also sizing up Mo Xiaobao as he struggled in his heart. He knew that it was very likely that Mo Jingli had not left yet. If he called someone over now, very soon Mo Suiyun shook his head. Mo Xiaobao would definitely not come here alone. Even if he was naughty, the people of the Prince Ding mansion would protect him in secret. Even if Mo Jingli killed Mo Yuchen, they would be the ones to bear Prince Ding's anger in the end. Plus, Mo Jingli could kill Prince Ding. But could Mo Jingli kill Prince Ding? Of course not. If Mo Jingli had this ability, it would not be his turn to sit on the throne now. So, Mo Yuchen could not be hurt. At least Mo Yuchen could not die here. Go quickly. Mo Suiyun came back to his senses and pulled Mo Xiaobao towards the window. Mo Xiaobao looked at him in surprise and said, "What are you doing? I came to play with you and you want to drive me away like this?" Mo Suiyun said angrily, "I'm not feeling well today, you go first." The more anxious he was, the more relaxed Mo Xiaobao was. He leaned on the table with a smile and said, "If you're not feeling well, then rest. I won't disturb you." Mo Suiyun was so anxious that he wanted to cry. If he had the ability he would have picked up Mo Xiaobao and thrown him out. Mo Xiaobao gently fluttered his long eyelashes and looked at him with a smile. He said slowly, "Why are you so anxious? It's as if you're afraid that others will know that I'm here. Don't worry, this is Glass City. Even if King Yu knows that I came here secretly, he won't do anything to me." King Yu was nothing. Mo Suiyun cursed in his heart. "In short, hurry up and leave. I don't want to play with you today." "I want to play with you. Why don't we go out and play?" Mo Xiaobao's eyes lit up as he said with a smile, "Young master, can I beg you to go back first?" Mo Suiyun couldn't help but groan. Whose life was he doing this for? Mo Xiaobao raised his handsome eyebrows and patted Mo Suiyun's shoulder. He laughed softly and said, "All right, I won't tease you anymore. Brother, if you have any difficulties, tell me. Is there anything that I can't handle in Glass City?" Mo Xiaobao acted as if they were brothers and had taken care of everything for their brothers. Mo Suiyun glanced at Mo Xiaobao with disdain. What could a kid who was shorter than him who only knew how to play do? He would be thankful if Mo Jingli didn't know that he was here and was killed by Mo Jingli. Mo Suiyun said snappily, "In short, hurry up and leave." Seeing that he was unwilling to speak, Emo Xiaobao didn't force him. He shrugged and said, "Then I'll go back first. If there's anything, get someone to find me at the Prince Ding mansion." "I got it, let's go." Seeing that he was finally willing to leave, Emo Suiyun naturally agreed and pushed him towards the window. Emo Xiaobao slapped his hand away and said, "It's enough to go to a place once. If I go through the window again, am I waiting to be caught?" Walking to a corner of the room, Emo Xiaobao leaped up and used the wall as leverage to sit firmly on the beam. He turned around and waved at Emo Suiyun. Emo Xiaobao then drilled out from a place on the roof that had been opened at some point. Seeing Emo Xiaobao reveal such a skill, Emo Suiyun was still stunned. Although he had seen many people with better qigong than Emo Xiaobao, those people were much older than Emo Xiaobao. To have such a body at such a young age, no wonder Emo Xiaobao dared to sneak into Dechu State's post house in broad daylight. After finally sending Emo Xiaobao away, Emo Suiyun secretly heaved a sigh of relief. "Your Majesty." Emo Jingyu's voice came from outside the door. Emo Suiyun's body stiffened, but he quickly recovered and walked over to open the door. "Uncle Yu." Emo Jingyu stood at the door and looked at Emo Suiyun strangely. "Why did you lock the door?" Emo Suiyun bit the corner of his lips and said in a low voice, "Uncle Yu, Emo Jingyu looked at him in understanding. "You're afraid?" Emo Suiyun nodded heavily. Emo Jingyu sighed helplessly. "Now that things have come to this, we have no choice but to do it. Your Majesty, you're not a child anymore. There are many things that you should understand." Emo Suiyun's face darkened. He said in a low voice, "I understand, Uncle Yu." "Oh, Uncle Li has left?" "He's gone." Emo Jingyu said in a low voice. At the mention of Emo Jingli, his expression did not look too good. He cursed in a low voice. "That lunatic. Who knows what he went to do again? Your Majesty, you don't have to be afraid. The day after tomorrow, as long as you follow Uncle Yu's instructions, you'll be fine." Emo Suiyun nodded obediently. "I understand, Uncle Yu." Seeing his listless appearance, Emo Jingyu knew that he must have been badly frightened just now. Among the remaining princes of Emo Jingqi, Emo Suiyun's performance was already considered not bad. If Emo Suiyun, who had already passed away, encountered such a thing, he would have been scared to the point of crying. Chapter 1070. "Uncle Wang won't disturb you anymore. Have a good rest," Emo Jingyu said softly. "Yes, Uncle Wang," Emo Suiyun said softly. Emo Jingyu patted Emo Suiyun's shoulder and turned to leave. Seeing Emo Jingyu leave, Emo Suiyun let out a sigh of relief. He closed the door and looked back at the roof that was no longer strange. He threw himself back into the thick blanket. On the roof of Emo Suiyun's room, two thin and small figures were lying motionlessly. Because the location they chose was right under the carved eaves of the roof, and there were also tree branches blocking the way, if it wasn't for someone walking up to the roof, they wouldn't be discovered at all. Emo Xiaobao lay on the roof without a care for his image and said with a smile, "So it's like this?" Beside him, Qin Lai rolled his eyes at him and said in a low voice, "Why aren't you leaving? Didn't you hear? That Emo Jingli is here." Emo Xiaobao said regretfully, "It's a pity that we found out too late. He's already run away. Don't tell me the little prince is planning to take the lead and personally catch that guy?" Qin Lai mocked harshly. Emo Xiaobao rolled his eyes. "Have you heard that Emo Jingli's martial arts are very high? He sneaked into the post house. This prince doesn't believe that he brought guards with him. We can just call people to pounce on him. We have more people, so what if we can't catch him?" Qin Lai shrugged. "The plan is not bad. It's a pity that he's already gone. How long do we have to lie there?" Emo Xiaobao looked up at the sky and said embarrassedly, "No matter what, we have to wait until it's dark. If they were caught, although their lives wouldn't be in danger if they were discovered in broad daylight, they would definitely alert the enemy." Qin Lai didn't care. He raised his eyebrows and said, "Emo Suiyun doesn't seem to want to follow Emo Jingyu's plan." Emo Xiaobao touched his chin. "As long as he's not completely stupid, he won't be willing. Emo Jingli has something on Emo Jingyu, but Emo Suiyun doesn't. Why would he accompany Emo Jingyu to his death? No matter if he succeeds or not, he's definitely going to die." Emo Xiaobao lay on the roof and held his chin, lost in thought. Looking at his strange smile, Qin Lai speechlessly smoothed the goosebumps on his arms and asked, "What do you want to do now?" Qin Lai deeply felt that being sent to accompany the little prince of the Prince Ding mansion was simply a huge test given to him by God. Little Crown Prince Mo's temperament was fickle and unpredictable. He loved to provoke Prince Ding. He lost every battle but lost every battle. He never got tired of it. That was fine, but the audacity and unpredictability of his actions were constantly testing his heart. Mo Xiaobao poked Qin Lai with a smile and said, "Do you think we can get the little emperor to defect?" Qin Lai looked at the sky and said calmly, "He thinks of you as an imaginary enemy. Do you think you can convince him to defect?" "That's different." Mo Xiaobao said, "My mother said that there are no eternal friends in this world, nor are there eternal enemies. There are only eternal benefits." Mo Suiyun didn't want to go against the Prince Ding mansion now. If he went against the Prince Ding mansion now, he wouldn't get any benefits. Instead, he would be in big trouble. Since that's the case, why can't he cooperate with us? The enemy of an enemy is a friend. I feel that if he had to choose a side, he would definitely choose to cooperate with the Prince Ding mansion. It's a pity that he pushed you out just now. Qin Lai slowly reminded. Mo Xiaobao raised his hand and scratched his little head. He frowned and thought for a long time before saying, "He doesn't believe me." He had acted too much before. In Mo Suiyun's eyes, he was probably a child who didn't know anything and only knew how to eat, drink and play. "Then what do you want?" Qin Lai asked. Mo Xiaobao said, "You wait here. I'll go down again." Qin Lai also knew that he couldn't win against Mo Xiaobao. He silently lay down on the ground and watched as Mo Xiaobao removed the glaze tiles that were just put back one by one. Then he jumped down from the small hole again. When night fell, Mo Xiaobao brought Qin Lai back to the Prince Ding mansion with a joyful expression. The moment he entered, he saw Uncle Mo, who was standing at the door waiting for them, giving him a pitiful look. Mo Xiaobao instantly felt that something was wrong. He hurriedly went up to Chief Steward Mo and smiled obediently. "Grandfather Mo." Chief Steward Mo hurriedly said, "This old servant doesn't dare. Little Shitzi can just call this old servant Chief Steward." Mo Xiaobao didn't care about this. He smiled and asked, "Grandfather Mo, where are my father and mother?" Chief Steward Mo said, "The prince and princess consort are waiting for little Shitzi in the study." Mo Xiaobao's shoulders instantly slumped. He said with a sad face, "It's over." When he left in the morning, he forgot to tell his mother and father that he would be back later. Mo Xiaobao firmly refused to admit that he didn't consider the fact that it was easy to enter the Dechu State's post house but difficult to leave. Furthermore, he got carried away by hooking up with a certain someone and forgot the time. Chief Steward Mo patted little Shitzi's shoulder lovingly and said, "The prince and princess consort are waiting for little Shitzi. Little Shitzi, quickly go to the study." "Can I not go?" Mo Xiaobao looked pitifully at Chief Steward Mo. Chief Steward Mo gave him a helpless look. Mo Xiaobao could only lower his head and slowly walk towards the study. "Our little Shitzi is back." In the study, Mo Xiaoyao was reclining on the soft couch, lazily flipping open a book. Seeing Mo Xiaobao enter, he gave him a faint smile. Mo Xiaobao carefully looked at Yi Li sitting on the other side. His expression became even more gloomy. He saw Yi Li sitting upright on the stool, looking at him with an indifferent expression. Other than a trace of relief flashing through her eyes when he entered, there was no other expression. Mo Xiaobao's mouth was bitter. Mother's anger was worse than father's anger. "Mother, Xiaobao is back." Walking in front of Yi Li, Mo Xiaobao said in a small voice. Yi Li looked at him indifferently and asked in a soft voice, "Why did you come back so late?" Mo Xiaobao said in a low voice, "This child went to Dechu State's post house to play with the little emperor." Actually, how could Yi Li and Mo Xiao not know about this? Even when Mo Xiaobao sneaked out, there were still many people following him. Moreover, Mo Xiaobao always had a sense of propriety. Normally, he would not deliberately shake off the shadow guard that followed him. If not for this, the entire Prince Ding mansion would have been in chaos when Mo Xiaobao didn't come back so late. Yi Li smiled at him and said, "It seems like the Dechu State's post house is very fun? It made you forget the time to return home? Tomorrow mother will go and ask King Yu, what exactly is in the Dechu State's post house that attracts our little Shitzi?" Yi Li never liked to restrict her child too much, so Mo Xiaobao had always been free to run around Glass City. But there was one rule. Other than Lishan Academy, he had to return home before sunset. Even if he was going to stay at the Su family temporarily, He had to send someone back to inform them in advance. But today Emo Xiaobao didn't say anything until now. From beginning to end he didn't tell anyone what he was doing. If it wasn't for the shadow guard following him, an ordinary family would have been anxious to death. Chapter 1071. Mother. Xiaobao didn't think it through. Xiaobao knows his mistake. Emo Xiaobao admitted his mistake with a bitter face. He had hurriedly sneaked in to find Emo Suiyun and indeed didn't say anything. Perhaps he knew that the shadow guard was following him, so he was so fearless. What did you do wrong? Yili asked. Emo Xiaobao obediently lowered his head. Xiaobao shouldn't have sneaked out without telling mother and father. I shouldn't have come back too late and forgotten to let someone report and make mother worry. I shouldn't have sneaked out to find the little emperor of Dechu state. Looking at her son's lowered head and pitiful appearance, Yili's heart softened. She raised her hand to rub his little head. Mother and father didn't hide the big matter in Glass City from you. You also know that the queen and prince of Nanzhao were held hostage by Emo Jingli. Right now Emo Jingli and Emo Jingyu's relationship is unclear, yet you still sent yourself to him. What if Emo Jingli injures you in a life-and-death struggle? What will you do then? Mother, this child was wrong. Feeling his mother's worry, Emo Xiaobao felt even more guilty. He felt that Emo Suiyun was very foolish and slow-witted and wanted to find him to get some information. He thought that in broad daylight, even if Emo Jingyu and Emo Jingli colluded, they wouldn't dare to do anything to him. However, he forgot that a cornered dog would do something desperate. If Emo Jingli completely lost his rationality and wanted to fight to the death with the Prince Ding mansion, he who ran into Dechu State's post house was the best bargaining chip. Yili raised her hand to knock his little head. She calmly said, since you know your mistake, you'll be grounded for 3 months. Write 30 pieces of calligraphy every day and bring them to your eldest uncle for inspection. Mother. Emo Xiaobao really wanted to cry. Of all the punishments, Emo Xiaobao hated being grounded the most. He couldn't leave his own courtyard and no one would go find him to play. Only the teachers took turns to teach him. Not to mention the 30 pieces of calligraphy. Unlike copying books, the requirements for practicing calligraphy were much stricter. His eldest uncle, who was good at calligraphy, was even more strict about this. When Emo Xiaobao first started practicing calligraphy, there were times when he couldn't find a single piece that satisfied Su Qingchen. In other words, out of the 30 that his mother said, he might end up writing 40 or even 100. Yili looked at him indifferently, smiling without saying anything. Xiaobao instantly knew that there was no hope for his mother. He could only stare at Emo Shuyao, who was not far away. Lord Father. Emo Shuyao sat up and raised his eyebrows at Emo Shuyao, who was looking at him pleadingly. He smiled calmly and said, Li, it's not appropriate to punish Xiaobao like this. Yili raised her eyebrows and looked at Emo Shuyao in surprise. Normally, if he saw her punish Emo Shuyao, he would only complain that the punishment was too light. It was already good enough that he did not add fuel to the fire. This was the first time she had pleaded for Emo Xiaobao. How is it not appropriate? Yili asked. Emo Shuyao softly said, in 2 days, it will be Lin Er and Xen Er's first birthday banquet. At that time Xiaobao as the older brother will be grounded. Wouldn't that be a joke to outsiders? Yili frowned. For such a large banquet, Emo Xiaobao as the little heir of the Prince Ding mansion would not be able to attend. But this was not a big deal. She could just let him out when the time came. Emo Shuyao walked to Yili's side and sat down. He smiled and said, I know that you are worried about Xiaobao's safety, so you want to ground him. But Xiaobao is no longer a child. This time should be an accident. Isn't that right, Xiaobao? Seeing Lord Father plead for him, Emo Xiaobao was overjoyed. He nodded and said, yes, mother. This child did not come back late on purpose. This child heard something very important at the post house. Let's hear it. Yili nodded. Emo Xiaobao hurriedly told her what he heard at the post house and his conversation with Emo Suiyun. Then he said, so this child was afraid that if the guards of the Dechu state found out, wouldn't it alert the enemy? So I waited until the sky turned dark before leaving the post house with Qin Lai. Mother, this child really knows his mistake. Yili's expression changed slightly. Emo Jingli is in the post house. Why didn't you let someone come out to report? Something happened. Emo Shuyao raised his hand to hold Yili's slightly cold hand. He looked at Mo Xiaobao and said, "So, you and Mo Swain have reached an agreement?" Mo Xiaobao said somewhat helplessly, "My Swain doesn't believe me. Someone must represent Lord Father to make a trip." Mo Shuyao pondered for a moment and nodded, "I'll let Han Mingyue make a trip later." After speaking, he patted Mo Xiaobao's head and said, "You did very well. Lord Father is very pleased. But you were still a bit rash. Let's move his punishment to half a month later." "Lord Father?" Hearing this, Mo Xiaobao wailed. "Didn't Lord Father plead for him? Why did he still have to be punished?" Mo Shuyao looked at his son with a radiant smile and asked softly, "What's wrong? Are you not satisfied? Then why don't we follow your mother's suggestion and ground him from tomorrow onwards?" Mo Xiaobao immediately wilted. He shook his head dejectedly and said, "No, thank you, Lord Father." Mo Shuyao nodded in satisfaction and said, "This is Lord Father's good son. Be good. Go back and eat your meal and rest." Despicable. Mo Xiaobao looked at Mo Shuyao from a place where Yili couldn't see. Mo Shuyao smiled back. "You did something wrong and got caught by your mother. What does it have to do with I? You clearly said that you'd leave Mo Suiyun's matter to me. I didn't say you could come home in the middle of the night." Once again defeated by Lord Father, Mo Xiaobao silently ground his teeth and obediently asked to leave. "Mother, Lord Father, this child will leave." Yili nodded and sighed. She rubbed her son's hair and said, "Go back and rest early." Seeing Mo Xiaobao leave, Yili helplessly sighed. Mo Xiaobao was too smart and learned a lot. She didn't want to restrict him like this. But he was still too young. His personality couldn't help but have a bit of a child's impulsiveness and willfulness. It made people worry. Mo Shuyao hugged her and softly comforted, "Don't worry, Xiaobao will slowly grow up. When I was his age, I couldn't even compare to him." This could be considered the highest praise Mo Shuyao could give to his son as a father. It was a pity that Mo Xiaobao would never know. Yili leaned in his embrace and lightly nodded. Chapter 1072. Lishan Academy. As usual, Mr. Qingyun sat leisurely in the bamboo forest behind the academy and drank tea. Now that Lishan Academy was on the right track, Mr. Qingyun was old and no longer suitable to teach personally. Other than Mr. Qingyun giving lectures to all the students every once in a while, most of the time he was very leisurely. Today the bamboo forest was very lively. Mo Shuyao, Yili, Mo Xiaobao, Lin Er, and the Su family were all gathered here. Even though he was very quiet as he got older, seeing his children and grandchildren gathered around him, Mr. Qingyun's face still had a few more smiles. Tomorrow is Lin Er and Xin Er's first birthday banquet. Why did you come out of the city today? Mr. Qingyun drank the tea that Yili personally brewed as he asked. Yili smiled and said, "It's because tomorrow is the first birthday banquet of the two little ones that we came to bring grandfather back to the city." Mr. Qingyun smiled and looked at her and said, "Am I so old that I can't go back to the city myself?" Mo Wuyo leaned against Yili and laughed softly, saying, "Clearly Wang Fei said that she hadn't come to greet Mr. Qingyun after coming back for so long, so she came personally. Who knew that everyone would come along?" Yun Ge was also brought along by Su Qingchen. She smiled at everyone and said, "It's very fun outside the city. Everyone likes it." Yili looked guiltily at Mr. Qingyun. After coming back for more than a month, she didn't have time to come out of the city to greet grandfather. Even her fourth brother and Qin Yan, who just came back from outside, came. She really was too unfilial. Mr. Qingyun looked lovingly at Yili and said with a smile, "You all have important matters to attend to. Grandfather has always been here. Isn't it the same when I come? Why take such a small matter to heart?" Yili smiled faintly and said, "Li Er is unfilial. I made grandfather worry and let those people disturb grandfather." Mr. Qingyun shook his head and indicated that Yili didn't need to mind. She looked at Yili, then at Mo Shuyao, who was sitting next to her, and then at the children in front of her. She nodded in satisfaction. When he married Yili to Mo Shuyao, Mr. Qingyun was actually not very satisfied. However, he had no choice but to do so. Mr. Qingyun had always felt guilty for not taking care of his daughter's only child. Fortunately, Li Er and that daughter of his who passed away early didn't believe in it. After so many years, the two of them became a celestial couple that everyone envied. Mr. Qingyun could tell that Mo Shuyao valued his granddaughter more than anything else. Mr. Qingyun was very satisfied that Yili could be so happy. He didn't care about these trivial matters. I heard that many things have happened recently. The Queen of Nanzhao hasn't been found yet? Mr. Qingyun asked. Su Qingchen frowned slightly and said, Grandfather, don't worry. Princess Anqi and the prince should be fine. In these 2 days, there should be a result. After all, they were in the Prince Ding Mansion's territory. If they were really played by Mo Jingli, the Prince Ding Mansion wouldn't be able to survive. The Prince Ding Mansion's shadow guard had already found some traces of Mo Jingli's whereabouts. However, in consideration of Princess Anqi's safety, they couldn't force him too much. But no matter what, they definitely couldn't let Mo Jingli and his remaining accomplices escape Glass City again. Mr. Qingyun didn't like to care about these things. Hearing Su Qingchen's words, he relaxed and only said, as the saying goes, a cornered dog will jump over a wall. The characters of the Dechu State's imperial family. The old man shook his head and sighed. In short, you all have to be careful. Otherwise, Mo Jingli will fight to the death. Mo Xiuyao nodded and said, I will remember Mr. Qingyun's teachings. Yi Li held Mr. Qingyun's arm and said with a smile, Grandfather, actually, we came here today to ask you about something else. Mr. Qingyun raised his eyebrows and said with a smile, You all did very well. What else is there for an old man like me to worry about? Yi Li smiled and looked at Su Qingfeng, Su Qingbai and the others sitting on one side. Then she looked at the two Madams Su on the other side and said with a smile, I discussed with eldest aunt and second aunt that after Lin Er and Exan Er's first birthday banquet, we will hold third brother and fourth brother's wedding. That's why I asked grandfather to go back and preside over the situation. Su Qingfeng and the others didn't expect Yi Li to suddenly say this. Su Qingfeng and Su Qingbai were fine, but Mo Wuyo and Hua Tianxiang immediately blushed. Mr. Qingyun looked at the two girls with a gentle expression and nodded with a smile. That's good. I remember. The 26th of this month is a good day. But it's too rushed. Will we be able to make it in time? There's still time. Our family has already prepared for a bad time. The two Madams Su repeatedly agreed. After waiting for their son to get married for so many years, it was finally here. Not to mention that there was still some time, even if it was tomorrow they had to prepare it for him. Mr. Qingyun nodded and said with a smile, That's good. Then let's set it for today. Qingfeng, Qingbai, you're not young anymore. After you get married you'll be adults. You have to represent Tianxiang and Wuyo well. Yes, grandfather. Su Qingfeng and Su Qingbai replied in unison. The children of the Su family generally got married late. Su Qingchen was still single after the new year. Therefore, before they got married they were already able to take care of themselves. Mr. Qingyun was very confident in his grandson. He said this out of concern for the younger generation. After giving instructions to Su Qingfeng and Su Qingbai, Mr. Qingyun's gaze swept past Su Qingchen and Yungu. He shook his head helplessly and didn't say anything. Because of Yi Li's mention of marriage, everyone suddenly became excited. Other than Hua Tianxiang and Mo Wuyo, who were going to be newlyweds, everyone was excitedly discussing how to hold the wedding. Even Su Hongyu and Su Hongyan, who were always calm and collected, had smiles on their faces. Princess. Qin Feng quickly walked over and reported in a deep voice. Mo Xiuyao asked, What's the matter? Qin Feng said, There's news of Nanzhao's Princess Anqi. Yi Li and Mo Xiuyao looked at each other and stood up. Mo Xiuyao said, Let's talk about it when we get back. Yi Li nodded apologetically at everyone and said, We'll be leaving first. Su Qingfeng said with a smile, Li, don't worry. Third brother will guarantee that grandfather and father will be safely sent back to Li City. Su Qingfeng was the commander of Qilin. With him here, Mo Jingli wouldn't attack Mr. Qingyun even if he didn't have eyes. Yi Li nodded and patted Mo Xiuyao's head to indicate that he should be obedient. Then she followed Mo Xiuyao out of the bamboo forest. Looking at the two leaving hand in hand, Mr. Qingyun smiled faintly and said, You came so early in the morning because you were worried that Mo Jingli would attack Lishan Academy? Su Qingfeng rubbed his head and said with a smile, It's better to be safe than sorry. Who can guarantee that Mo Jingli, that madman, won't attack this place? Mr. Qingyun glanced at everyone and said, Then why did so many of you come here? Aren't you going to be wiped out? Chapter 1073. Hearing this, those who came to join in the fun, such as Su Qingyan, quickly shrunk their heads and left after saying that they were going to take a stroll. Not long after, only Master Qingyun, Su Hongyu, Su Hongyan, Su Qingchen, Su Qingze, and Su Qingbai were left in the bustling bamboo forest. Is there anything else? Master Qingyun looked at his grandson and asked calmly. Su Hongyu hesitated and said, "There is something I need to ask, father." Master Qingyun raised his snow-white eyebrows. Is it related to Qingfeng and Qingbai's marriage? If it wasn't because of this, Li Er wouldn't have suddenly mentioned Su Qingfeng and Su Qingbai's marriage. Although it was time for the two to get married, there was no need to rush it. Su Hongyu nodded and said, "That's right. These days, many aristocratic families have come to our door and expressed their intention to have a marriage alliance with the Su family." Master Qingyun frowned slightly and a rare trace of displeasure appeared between his brows. Don't they know that Qingbai and Qingfeng are already engaged? Su Hongyu smiled bitterly and helplessly. The rules and etiquette in this world were just for the common people who didn't know the truth to see. Which aristocratic family with a long history didn't have a bit of shameful things? Even a family like the Su family had a history of betraying its master and killing the emperor. Therefore, as long as they could achieve their goals and obtain the benefits they wanted, why would these people care if the young masters of the Su family were engaged? Moreover, although Hua Tianxiang and Mo Wuyo's status was noble in the eyes of these people, there was only one word that could describe it: the decline of their family. Most importantly, even if Su Qingbai and Su Qingfeng were married, the most important young master of the Su family, Su Qingchen, was still single. What did Li Er say? Master Qingyun asked calmly. Su Hongyu smiled faintly. Li Er said that the matters of the imperial court don't need to involve marriage. She also doesn't need her brothers and friends to sacrifice their happiness for her. That's why she told father that she wants Qingbai and Qingbai to get married as soon as possible. It can also be considered as cutting off these people's thoughts. Li Er's personality and thoughts are really... The people in this world had long been accustomed to linking the imperial court and marriage together. That was why there was the term marriage alliance. However, Yili seemed to dislike mixing these two things together. It wasn't just because she was a member of the Su family and her friend. Mr. Qingyun nodded approvingly and said, "Although your way of thinking is different from ordinary people, you dare to think, dare to do, and have the courage to bear the consequences. In this aspect, all of you are inferior to Li." Su Qingchen smiled and said, "A girl like Li Er, 1 in a million, doesn't appear in this world. But fortunately there's only one." Su Hongyu glanced at his son and said, "Don't stay out of this. After all, this matter isn't directed at your third brother and fourth brother. Young Master Qingchen, right, Chief Minister of the Prince Ding Mansion, what do you plan to do?" There were many people in the Prince Ding Mansion over the age of 30 who were still unmarried, such as Han Mingyue, Han Mingxi, and even Feng Zhiyao. However, there were very few people in high positions like young Master Qingchen who didn't have the slightest interest in women. In the past, all kinds of things happened in the Prince Ding Mansion, so no one cared. Now that the world was peaceful and Su Qingchen was the right chief minister of the Prince Ding Mansion, he naturally had many people watching him. If Su Qingchen didn't take it seriously, he would say all kinds of unpleasant things in the future. Mr. Hongyu had always been good at preparing for a rainy day, so he naturally had to give his son a warning. Su Qingchen smiled faintly and didn't seem to be anxious at all. Su Qingbai raised his eyebrows and smiled gently. Didn't Big Brother and Miss Shin? Su Qingbai was in West Hill all year round. It could be said that he was the least familiar with Yun Gu in the Su family, so he called her Miss Shin. Su Qingchen glanced at him faintly and said, "Fourth brother, you think too much." Su Qingbai blinked and a strange smile flashed across his eyes. He didn't say anything. But Su Hongyu and Su Hongyan, who were reminded by him, looked at each other. In the end, Su Hongyan said, "Qingbai is right. Qingchen, what do you think of Yun Gu? Your mother, second aunt, and your father all like this girl very much." "That's what you mean. Second uncle, you think too much." Su Qingchen was still elegant and the width of his smile didn't change at all. Su Qingbai looked at his big brother for a moment and said with a smile, "I heard that Miss Yun Gu is quite afraid of Big Brother?" Young Master Qingchen has always been known for his amiability. Why would anyone be afraid of him? "Big Brother, what did you do to the girl?" Su Qingbai. Su Qingchen called faintly, but his eyes were full of warning when he looked at Su Qingbai. Su Qingbai shrugged with a smile and raised his hand to show that it was over. Although his big brother's appearance was always extraordinary like an immortal, he was merciless when it came to messing with people. For the time being, he didn't have the ability to compete with his big brother. Su Qingbai always knew what it meant to know one's own limitations. That girl called Yungu is not bad. Mr. Qingyun smiled and leisurely concluded. He looked at his most important eldest grandson and said, now that your second brother already has Ruhr, your third brother and fourth brother are about to get married. Our Su family isn't in a hurry to have an heir. Your father and I have never pressured you about your marriage, but you should think about it carefully. It can't be that you really plan to cultivate and become an immortal in the future, right? Grandfather, you're too serious. Qingchen understands. In front of Mr. Qingyun, Su Qingchen had always been very obedient. It's good that you understand. You don't have to rush him too much. Mr. Qingyun nodded with satisfaction and said to his two sons, however, since this matter is directed at you, you have to deal with it yourself. If you really like the daughter of a famous family, it's okay to marry her. But your sister is right. The Prince Ding mansion doesn't need a marriage alliance, and the Su family doesn't need one. Do you understand? Qingchen will remember grandfather's teachings. Su Qingchen replied in a deep voice. Su Qingchen and Su Qingbai walked out of the bamboo forest side by side and saw Qingjing with Hua Tianxiang and a few children playing in a meadow full of flowers outside the bamboo forest. Su Qingbai's gaze turned from Mo Wuyo to Yun Gu, who was holding a bunch of flowers and smiling especially brightly. He said with a faint smile, in all these years, I've never seen a girl who can smile so happily. We have experienced too much, understood too much, and knew too much. Even if we are happy, it's hard to express it without restraint. Big brother, don't you think so? Following his gaze, Su Qingchen's expression softened slightly. On the green grassland, there were light purple, light yellow, light blue, and pink flowers decorating this piece of tender green heaven and earth. A beautiful yellow-clothed girl was holding a bouquet of colorful flowers, smiling happily. The faint sunlight sprinkled on her body. Her entire person seemed to have a faint layer of gentle light, making people feel warm from the heart. Chapter 1074. Su Qingbai was right, he had never seen a girl who could smile so happily. Even if she didn't do anything, just seeing her smile could make people feel that all their tiredness and unhappiness were swept away. Perhaps this was because her life was too simple and happy. Since young, she had never experienced any schemes in those dark things. She was very smart, she could clearly distinguish who was good to her and who was bad to her. Those who were good to her, she would repay them double. Those who were bad to her, she would simply throw them to the back of her mind and not pay them any attention. This was another kind of gratification and vengeance. Big brother, if there are flowers to pluck, then pluck them. Don't wait until there are no flowers to pluck. Su Qingbai smiled and left the sentence, then walked towards the group of people playing on the grass. Eldest uncle, fourth uncle, Mo Xiaobao, who was originally entangled with Su Jirui, immediately rushed over when he saw the two people. Su Qingbai caught Mo Xiaobao and frowned, saying, Mo Xiaobao, you've gotten fat. Mo Xiaobao's delicate little face suddenly stiffened. After a while, he pitifully raised his little paw. Fourth uncle, I will soon be as thin as firewood and bones. I was punished by mother, grounded for 3 months. Mo Xiaobao faintly said. Su Qingbai sympathetically patted his little head. Eat more these few days. Mo Xiaobao dejectedly drooped his head. Big brother, fourth brother. Qingjing pulled Su Jirui and greeted the two with a smile. Su Qingchen walked forward and nodded, saying, Grandfather is almost done with the preparations. Everyone should also prepare to return to the city. Qingjing also knew that tomorrow was the Prince Ding Mansion's birthday banquet and there were still many things to do. She quickly nodded, saying, Yes, let's go see if there's anything else to pack. Qingjing left with the girls and children. Yungu naturally followed beside Mo Wuyo. She secretly glanced at Su Qingchen and sighed in her heart. Yungu, you come with me. Su Qingchen's faint voice came from behind. The smile on Yunji's face suddenly froze. She turned around and stared blankly at Su Qingchen. Su Qingchen strolled in front of her and asked, Have you finished the homework I told you to do? I'm done. Miss Yungu was at a loss. If they were not in Lishan Academy, she would have rushed to the study to get her homework for Su Qingchen to check. Su Qingchen frowned slightly and nodded. Scope. Yungu nodded repeatedly and followed closely behind Su Qingchen. However, no matter how one looked at her back, it was bleak and desolate. Looking at their departing figures from afar, Su Qingbai couldn't help but chuckle. "Fourth brother, what are you laughing at?" Su Qingfeng suddenly appeared behind him and asked curiously. Su Qingbai shook his head and turned around with a smile. "Big brother, are you thinking of taking in a disciple? Accepted disciple? What kind of disciple does Big brother have?" Su Qingfeng was at a loss. What could Su Qingchen teach as a disciple? How could he produce an immortal young master? Su Qingbai stroked his chin and said thoughtfully, "But why do I feel that Big brother treats Yunj like a student and a teacher? Furthermore, they are students and teachers who are very afraid of teachers." Su Qingfeng glanced at the two figures who had already walked far away. He lowered his head and couldn't help but feel amused. Needless to say, they really did look alike. After a long while, the two brothers looked at each other, and a very strange thought appeared in their minds. The genius immortal young master. Could it be that he really doesn't eat the food of the common populace, and doesn't know how to pursue the girl he likes? No one would believe that young Master Qingchen really treated Yungu as his own disciple. Miss Yungu was very smart and cute, but she had no interest in music, chess, calligraphy, painting, and especially in politics. Moreover, she wasn't smart enough to make young Master Qingchen look at her differently. Thinking of this, the two of them shivered. In this world, no one is perfect. Su Qingbai sighed. What sin did Miss Shin commit in her previous life to make Big brother take a fancy to her? Su Qingfeng shook his head and said regretfully. Young Master Qingchen looked gentle and refined, but when he lectured someone, he only needed a faint look to make you feel so ashamed that you wished you had never been born. No wonder Miss Yungu looked at Su Qingchen like a mouse seeing a cat. The two brothers looked at each other and sent their most sincere blessings and prayers to Miss Yungu in their hearts. In a secluded little village outside Glass City, Emo Xiuyao and Yi Li stood outside a simple house. Emo Xiuyao's face was gloomy. Yi Li pulled his hand and shook it gently. Emo Xiuyao looked down at Yi Li and his face softened a little. Qin Feng stood not far from the two of them and said in a low voice, Princess, they have left." Emo Xiuyao looked at the simple house in front of him and said thoughtfully, "During this period, Emo Jingli has been living here? No one discovered him?" Qin Feng nodded and said, "This subordinate had people secretly ask around. The person living here during this period is a middle-aged man with a big beard. The time is the same as when Emo Jingli sneaked into the northwest, but he doesn't look like Emo Jingli at all." Big beard. Emo Xiuyao's face flashed with a strange look. He changed his appearance. Qin Feng nodded and said, "Yes, he changed his appearance. He found some disguises in the room. But there was no trace of Princess Anqi or the little prince. The people nearby also said that they didn't see a woman or a baby." Emo Xiuyao nodded and said, "Emo Jingli has become smarter now. Naturally, he wouldn't put Princess Anqi and the child together with himself. But if he really is living here, then Princess Anqi can't be too far away." Yi Li nodded in agreement with Emo Xiuyao's opinion. She ordered, "With this place as the center, see if there's any place within a radius of 10 li that can hide someone." Qin Feng acknowledged and left. Emo Xiuyao turned and pulled Yi Li saying, "Let's go in and take a look." The two entered the room. Because the Prince Ding mansion had just been searched by the Shadow Guard, the room was a bit messy. But even in its original state, the room wasn't much better. There was a simple and crude table with 4 long stools, a bed made of wooden planks and a shabby old cabinet. There were also some shabby clothes on the bed. Other than that, there was nothing useful. Yi Li sighed softly and said, "He's changed a lot. In the past he wouldn't have been able to live in a place like this for so long. One could say that Emo Jingli was cruel and merciless, or that he was reckless and impulsive. In fact, Emo Jingli had never suffered much, so he always gave people a feeling that he was above everyone else. Living in such a shabby place for so long wasn't something that the old Emo Jingli would have been able to do." Emo Xiuyao smiled and said, "People change. If he wants to live, he naturally has to endure some things that he couldn't do in the past. Now it seems, the effect is quite good. For Emo Jingli to reach such a state of complete defeat, it's obvious that he hasn't suffered enough. Only through suffering could one rise above others." This sentence was not just for show. If Emo Jingli's current situation was compared to 10 years ago, perhaps Emo Jingli's future would have been bright. Emo Xiuyao rejoiced in Emo Jingli's misfortune, not realizing that he was the one who caused all of Emo Jingli's suffering. Chapter 1075. What is this? Yili lowered her head and picked up a delicate box from the foot of the bed. She frowned. She opened it. It was a box of light red rouge with the scent of osmanthus flowers. Yili frowned in confusion. Why is this here? Could it be Princess Anchi was kidnapped and brought here? Yili quickly realized that something was wrong. She shook her head. No, even if Princess Anchi is special, Emo Jingli wouldn't provide her with rouge. But from the looks of the rouge, it didn't look like it was left behind by the previous owner of this house. The value of this rouge was enough to cover the expenses of a family in this village for half a year. It's not bad, Qin Feng. Emo Xiao took it and looked at it. A strange smile appeared on his face. He handed it to Qin Feng, who was waiting at the door. Qin Feng sniffed it and said in a low voice, "This is the rouge that the fragrance pavilion in Glass City started selling last month. It's called Guanghan Fragrance." You know a lot about it. Emo Xiuyao looked at him with a faint smile. Qin Feng lowered his head in embarrassment. Yili smiled faintly. She remembered that Yaoji also liked the scent of osmanthus flowers. She shook her head. I remember that the rouge from the fragrance pavilion is very expensive. Not many people can afford it. Go find out when it was bought. Qin Feng nodded in agreement. He turned and left to give orders. Emo Xiuyao pulled Yili and said with a smile, "Let's go back. We won't find anything here. Tomorrow is the most important day." Yili nodded. All right. No matter what Emo Jingli wanted to do, he wouldn't miss tomorrow. They really should make more preparations. In a dark and secluded cave, Princess Anchi was holding a baby. She looked at the baby lovingly. The baby had just had some breast milk and had fallen asleep. Fortunately, the child was quite well behaved. In the past few days when they were locked up, Emo Jingli came to visit a few times. Coincidentally, the child was asleep and did not anger the person who had obviously gone crazy. She lowered her head and counted the days. Tomorrow was the first birthday banquet of the little heir and princess of the Prince Ding mansion. Princess Anchi knew that whatever Emo Jingli wanted to do, he would do it in the next 2 days. She sighed softly and looked at the baby in her arms. "Baby, don't be afraid. No matter what happens, Mother will protect you." A tall figure appeared at the entrance of the cave. Emo Jingli walked in, his entire body brimming with anger. He glared at Princess Anchi furiously. "You're so carefree." Princess Anchi looked up at him and said indifferently, "What else can I do when I'm locked up here? You've never been here at this time. What's the matter?" Emo Jingli sneered and said, "The people of the Prince Ding mansion found my hiding place. But you don't have to be happy. Even so, they can't find this place." Princess Anchi said, "I'm not happy." She could not relax for a moment until the child was out of danger. Naturally, she could not be happy. Emo Jingli snorted with satisfaction and said fiercely, "Get up and come with me." Princess Anchi was stunned and asked in confusion, "Where are we going?" "What? Are you addicted to being here? Don't you want to see your husband?" Emo Jingli sneered. "Give me the child." Princess Anchi's expression changed. She hurriedly put the child behind her and said angrily, "Don't even think about it." "I'll say it again. Give me the child." Emo Jingli said in a low voice. "Impossible. What do you want my child for?" Princess Anchi said warily. Emo Jingli did not argue with her. He directly went to take the child. Princess Anchi wasn't a weak woman who couldn't even truss a chicken. Naturally, she wouldn't submit so easily. But she was holding the child in one hand. She had been locked up here for a few days and had not eaten much. Her physical strength was weak. After a few rounds, Emo Jingli subdued her and took the child from her. "Shoga." Princess Anchi cried anxiously. "Emo Jingli, what do you want? Give the child back to me." Emo Jingli held the child and glanced at Princess Anchi indifferently. "If he dares to act rashly again, I'll strangle him to death." Princess Anchi immediately froze. She did not dare to move her eyes and stared at Emo Jingli's hand on the child's neck. She was afraid that he would hurt the child if he used too much force. Seeing her like this, Emo Jingli nodded with satisfaction and said with a smile, "Very good. Someone will disguise you later and take you into the city. You'd better behave and not cause any trouble. Otherwise, I'll make sure you see this little thing die miserably." Princess Anshi's expression changed and her face turned as pale as paper. Don't hurt Shuoger. He's innocent. If you have any problems, come at me. Mo Jingli glanced at her and said with a smile, don't worry. As long as you're obedient, I won't hurt the child. What a cute child. I've never seen him when he was this old. Princess Anshi composed herself and said in a low voice, you'd better keep your word. Mo Jingli smiled coldly. He turned and walked out with the child. Soon he disappeared into the cave. Princess Anshi stared blankly at the entrance of the cave. After a while she finally came back to her senses. Sure, don't be afraid. Mother will save you. Princess Anshi murmured softly. A determined light flashed in her eyes. Two men in plain clothes rushed in from the entrance of the cave. They walked up to Princess Anshi and said in a low voice, Your Highness, His Majesty ordered us to disguise you. Princess Anshi glanced at them coldly and said in a low voice, Let's begin. Chapter 1076. On this day Glass City was exceptionally lively. The last time it was so lively was a year ago at Master Qingyun's birthday banquet. But at that time, most of the guests who came to the banquet came with ulterior motives. But this time they were all in a different mood. There was a complicated feeling of awe and admiration, as well as the vague intention of showing goodwill. In the past year, whether it was the Prince Ding mansion or the entire world, there had been earth-shaking changes. Anyone with eyes could see that there was no one in the world who could compete with Prince Ding. At least there wouldn't be anyone in the next 10 years. And everyone couldn't help but worry that when the Prince Ding mansion regained its strength, it would once again send its troops to conquer the world. And when that time came, who would be able to resist the Prince Ding mansion's cavalry? If the allied forces of the three countries had not just been defeated, and if it wasn't for the fact that the difference in power and influence was too great, it would probably be another allied attack. But now, since they didn't have the strength to meet force with force, they could only show weakness. The banquet this time was held in the Prince Ding mansion. Because it was only the children's first birthday banquet, the Prince Ding mansion didn't invite too many guests. The guests were only the envoys of the various countries and the civil and military officials of the Prince Ding mansion. The other famous people of the various countries were not invited, so naturally there weren't many guests. But the people of Glass City were still lively as if it was a festival. In the inner courtyard of the Prince Ding mansion, the two babies woke up early in the morning and put on new exquisite clothes. Yili carried them and played with Hua Tianxiang and the others who had already arrived. The two Madams Su and Qin Zheng were busy with the banquet, so the children could only be left in the care of a few unmarried girls. Mother, Goddess, Exen was wearing a pink dress embroidered with hibiscus. Around her neck was an exquisite jade longevity lock. Around her hands and feet were silver rings. Sitting in Mo Wu Yu's embrace, she was as exquisite and beautiful as the jade girl beside Goddess Guanyin in a painting. Wu Yu smiled as she caressed Exen'er's little face and said, Little Exen, mother is busy. I'll come and see you in a while. When she woke up early in the morning and did not see her mother, Exen'er was unhappy. Mother, mother. When Lin who was beside her, heard his sister call out mother, he also joined in the commotion. Moreover, Lin was clearly more mobile than his sister. He climbed up from the soft floor and wobbled his way out. Hua Tianxiang hurriedly carried him back. Lin, be a good boy. Mother will come to see you in a while. Good baby, play with sister first. Hearing the word sister, Lin immediately tilted his head to look at Exen. By the time Hua Tianxiang put them together, the siblings had completely forgotten about looking for their mother. Everyone couldn't help but smile as they watched the brother and sister sitting on the wide, soft couch and babbling words that adults couldn't understand. Exen, our big brother is here to see you. Outside the door, Mo Xiaobao brought Su Jire Leng Junhan, and Qin Lai excitedly rushed in and stretched out his arms to hug Exen. Exen obviously liked Mo Xiaobao, her big brother, very much. She immediately stretched out her little hands to ask for a hug. Mo Xiaobao happily hugged his sister in his arms and looked at the other children as if showing off. However, he disdained his little brother in every possible way, thoroughly implementing the glorious tradition of the Prince Ding mansion where the girls were treasures and the boys were grass. Little Mo Yufeng, who was just 1 year old, also disliked his big brother. Seeing Mo Xiaobao carry away his sister who was with him every day, he immediately became angry. Xiaobao is bad. Big sister. Big sister. Being called by his nickname by his little brother, Mo Xiaobao's handsome little face immediately darkened. Exener, who was in his arms, turned her head to look at her little brother, then looked at her big brother who was holding her. She was in a difficult position for a moment, but still reached out to her little brother who was on the soft couch. Little brother. Helpless, Mo Xiaobao could only put his little sister back on the soft couch. Thus the two little dolls hugged each other again. Mo Yufeng stared at Mo Xiaobao with his big watery eyes, as if the person in front of him was a big bad person who wanted to separate him and his little brother. Seeing Mo Xiaobao's face twisted in anger, everyone unkindly laughed out loud. Little heir, why did you come over? Mo Wuyo covered her mouth and asked with a smile. Mo Xiaobao had a good relationship with Mo Wuyo since he was young. Hearing her question, he smiled and said, "It's very busy outside. Mother disliked us for being a hindrance, so she let me come over to see my little brother and sister." Mo Wuyo nodded. Today was indeed very busy. Moreover, the princess of Nanzhao had gone missing and had not been found yet. The Prince Ding mansion was full of people coming and going, so it was not safe. In comparison, the inner courtyard that was heavily guarded and no outsiders were allowed to enter was much safer. Mo Wuyo smiled and said, "That's very good. Little heir, come with me and Tianxiang Yungu to take care of Lin Er and Exe." Mo Xiaobao looked resentfully at his younger brother and sister who were hugging each other lovingly on the couch. He really wasn't an evil mother-in-law who wanted to separate a pair of mandarin ducks, okay? No matter how lively the front courtyard of the Prince Ding mansion was, with people coming and going, the study in the inner courtyard was as quiet as usual. As the hosts Mo Xiuyao and Yi Li did not go out to receive guests. Instead they leisurely sat in the study and read. With the Prince Ding mansion's current strength and status, there were very few guests that they could personally receive. Moreover, guests with truly high status would not arrive early. Mo Xiuyao leisurely flipped through some unofficial history. He half reclined on the couch, his head resting on Yi Li's leg. His snow-white hair casually fell over Yi Li's knee with a few strands falling to the ground. Reporting to Princess, the Queen of Nanzhao has entered the city. At the door, Zhuo Jing calmly reported. Mo Xiuyao flipped through a page and calmly replied, "Understood. Send someone to keep an eye on her. Save the Queen of Nanzhao when the time is right. Tell them not to act rashly and do their best to ensure the Queen's safety." This subordinate obeys. Yi Li frowned slightly and said, "What about the little prince?" Qin Feng was silent for a moment, then said in a low voice, "Yes, I haven't seen the little prince. However, we have already placed spies in all the places in Li City where people could be hidden. Therefore, this subordinate suspects that Mo Jingli may have hidden the little heir in a place that we would not suspect." Yi Li was silent. Of course she knew who Qin Feng was referring to. She lowered her head to look at Mo Xiuyao. Mo Xiuyao's eyes were half closed as he leisurely said, "Do what you need to do. You must save the little prince of Nanzhao. Right now Nanzhao is very important to us." What was important was not Princess Anxi and the little prince, but their identities. In the past few years the Prince Ding mansion had no plans to send any more troops. But even so, Xiling and the Dechu state still needed someone to keep them in check. And in the south, the valiant Nanjiang was naturally the best choice. At least for the next few decades, Nanzhao would be the Prince Ding mansion's ally. This subordinate understands. This subordinate will take his leave. With Mo Xiuyao's declaration, Qin Feng naturally had no more misgivings. He turned and left to handle matters. In the room, Yi Li calmly said, "Mo Jingli definitely has more than just Mo Jingyu under his control. Mo Jingyu had just arrived in Li City and had no foundation in Li City. Mo Jingli could enter and leave Li City without a trace. This was not something that Mo Jingyu could do. There must be someone who was extremely familiar with Li City's environment and various matters helping him in secret." Chapter 1077. Mo Xiuyao smiled faintly, "Of course. In this world, there are always people with ulterior motives who are waiting to betray you at any time. If not to catch these annoying bugs, why would I keep Mo Jingli here for so long? Will Mo Jingli be able to tell that you went easy on him?" Yi Li asked worriedly. If that was the case, Princess Anxi and the child would be in danger. Mo Xiuyao smiled. If Mo Jingli still wants to do something today, he will come whether he can tell or not. Besides, I'm guessing that he has been blinded by hatred for a long time. Even if I went easy on him, he won't be able to tell. You know him well, Yi Li said with a frown. Actually, in Yi Li's view, Mo Jingli's hatred for Mo Xiuyao came out of nowhere. On the battlefield, victory and defeat were common. One had to bear the consequences of victory and defeat. It was unimaginable that Mo Jingli would hate Mo Xiuyao so much that he would lose his mind. Besides, Mo Jingli had fallen to such a state. Shouldn't he be more worried about the Dechu state's Empress Dowager and the imperial family's betrayal and the West Hills' use of him? The Prince Ding mansion shouldn't be on the list. Mo Xiuyao smiled faintly. Of course he wouldn't tell Yi Li what he had done to Mo Jingli. Qin Xiufu requests to see the prince's consort. A voice sounded from outside the door. Mo Xiuyao sat up and said coldly, "Come in." The door of the study was pushed open. Qin Xiufu walked in and bowed respectfully. "Greetings to the prince's consort." Yi Li smiled. "Mr. Xiuting, you don't have to be so courteous. You have just arrived in Glass City and you are already so busy. Thank you for your hard work." Qin Xiufu cupped his hands and said with a smile, "Wang Fei, you're exaggerating. It's my duty, I don't dare to complain." These few days Qin Xiufu did not have an easy time. Qin Xiufu even regretted that he had been tricked by Su Qingbai to come back with him. Once he reached Glass City, Prince Ding immediately announced that he was appointed as the left prime minister. Immediately the faces of the aristocratic families of Dechu State, who were originally polite to him, changed. It was also true that the power of the military generals in King Ding's residence was held in the hands of the Mo family's military generals who were loyal to King Ding. As for the two positions that represented the highest civil officials, one was occupied by the eldest young master of the Su family, while the other was taken advantage of by him, an outsider from Xiling. How could this not anger the people who had been secretly scheming against each other these days? However, after being disciplined by Prince Ding, these people naturally did not dare to talk about Prince Ding's nepotism. Therefore, all their dissatisfaction was directed at him as the left prime minister. A strong dragon could not suppress a local snake. Although Qin Xiufu's abilities were not ordinary, he was still an outsider who had just arrived in Glass City. It was easy to imagine how difficult these few days were. Sometimes Qin Xiufu could not help but suspect that Prince Ding had appointed him as the left prime minister to suppress these old aristocratic families of Dechu State. At the same time, it also prevented him as the left prime minister from colluding with these people. However, no matter why Prince Ding did this, Qin Xiufu knew that he would accept the position of left prime minister. It was not for power, nor was it because of Prince Ding's pressure. It was because only by standing higher could he realize his dreams and ambitions. "What's the matter, left prime minister?" He was different from Yi Li. Other than people who were close to him like Su Qingchen or old confidants of the Prince Ding mansion, Mo Xiuyao had always called people by their names or titles. This made people feel the difference between close and distant. At first it might make people feel uncomfortable, but it also made people more cautious. This meant that Prince did not treat you as a true confidant. People with ambition would naturally work harder to improve themselves, and those who wanted to dawdle would restrain themselves. More importantly, this also showed Prince Ding's high status and power. It made people want to submit to him involuntarily. Qin Xiufu nodded and said, "Reporting to Prince, Genom of Gojoseon of Xiling requests an audience." Mo Xiuyao raised his eyebrows and said, "Lei Tingfeng. Why is he here now?" As soon as he finished speaking, Mo Xiuyao's heart moved and said, "Murong Shen and Marquis Nan?" Qin Xiufu smiled and said, "Yes, congratulations, Prince. I just received news that General Murong and Marquis Nan have been unstoppable. They are now approaching the border city of Xiling. The Xiling army has also been completely withdrawn." Hearing this news, not only Mo Xiuyao but also Yi Li's mood became better. She smiled and said, "It is indeed good news." If it were other officials, they would inevitably say a few words of flattery at this time. They would say that such good news came from the birthday banquet of the Crown Prince and Princess. The Crown Prince and Princess had great fortune and so on. But Qin Xiufu would not. First, his character did not allow it. Second, Qin Xiufu was originally from Xiling. These flattering words would be too cold and heartless for him to say. Therefore, Qin Xiufu only silently waited for Mo Xiuyao and Yi Li's decision. Mo Xiuyao stood up and said with a smile, "Very well, please invite Genom of Gojoseon in. Speaking of which, Li, the Chu state sent a message and asked them to send someone to discuss the issue of the 300,000 troops. Although it was the Chu state's troops that drove away Shiling's troops, Mo Shuyao did not intend to give up the land north of Yunlan River to the Chu state. If it were not for Murong Shin and Marquis Nan, a mere 300,000 troops would be nothing more than food for Shiling. Since he had put in the effort, he naturally could not go without benefits. Although the Chu state had Mo Jingyu in Mo Xuyao's eyes, Mo Jingyu was almost a dead man. Naturally, the Chu state needed to send someone else to negotiate. Yili nodded and said, I understand. Prince Ding, Princess Xiaoding. Lei Tingfeng stepped into the parlor outside the study and calmly nodded to the two. His expression was so calm that it was impossible to tell that he had just received the news of Shiling's defeat. Yili smiled and nodded. Genom of Gojoseon, there is no need to be so polite. Please sit. Lei Tingfeng sat down and glanced at Qin Xiufu, who was sitting on the left with a complicated expression. This person was originally one of Shiling's top Confucian scholars. His ability, wisdom and ideas were all top-notch. It was a pity that he had not achieved anything important in Shiling for decades. Who would have thought that in just a few years after the fall of Emperor of Shiling City, he would be promoted to the position of left Prime Minister of Prince Ding Mansion? Should it be said that Mo Shuyao appointed people based on their merits, or were the others blind? Genom of Gojoseon, what's the matter? Mo Shuyao leaned back in his chair and asked leisurely. Lei Tingfeng smiled bitterly and helplessly in his heart. Compared to Mo Shuyao, his aura was weaker. Furthermore, he was the one who had a request, so he had to lower himself even more by taking the initiative to visit. But thinking of the news that had just come back from the battlefield, Lei Tingfeng knew that he had to put down his pride. Now there were only the 300,000 soldiers of Dechu State and Marquis Murongshun and Marquis Nan on the border of Shiling. But now that the war in the Central Plains had been settled, if Mo Shuyao was willing, he could send the cavalry and generals of the Mahist army to the south to reinforce Murongshun and Marquis Nan. At that time it would really be a disaster for Shiling. Saluting, Lei Tingfeng said in a low voice, "To be honest, I came to disturb Prince and Princess Consort today because of the truce between our two armies. Prince and Princess Consort must have received the battle report from the front lines. The Shiling army has already retreated to the border between Shiling and Dechu State." Chapter 1078. Mo Shuyao nodded, frowning as he said, "A truce between the two armies is naturally a good thing. These past few years of continuous campaigns have caused the common people to suffer unspeakably. Genom of Gojoseon has the intention to quell the war, and I am very happy. However, the ones fighting the Western Tomb are the troops of the Dechu State. I'm afraid that this matter will only be settled after a meeting with King Yu of the Dechu State." Lei Tingfeng raised his eyebrows, looking at Mo Shuyao as he said seriously, "Why is Prince Ding like this? You and I both understand. Although the ones fighting are the troops of Southern Chu, isn't it still up to Prince Ding to decide whether to fight or to make peace? Moreover, I'm afraid that King Yu won't have the chance to discuss this matter with you and me. Currently, the affairs of the Western Tomb State are busy, and I can't wait for the time when Southern Chu sends out an envoy. I hope that His Highness Prince Ding will be magnanimous enough to forgive us." Mo Shuyao sized up Lei Tingfeng with interest for a while, before smiling and saying, "It looks like Genom of Gojoseon is really well informed." Lei Tingfeng said with an indifferent smile, "Prince Ding also knows of the relationship between the Emperor of Shiling and the infinite boundless mountain. Naturally, he has some special channels for information." Mo Shuyao nodded absent-mindedly, saying, "Since Genom of Gojoseon has this sincerity, I naturally don't want to cause any more trouble. However, there are still some things that we need to make clear in advance." Lei Tingfeng frowned slightly. "Our army will completely withdraw from the Dechu State. In addition, I's information on the Dechu State and Mo Jingli can also be given to Prince Ding. I wonder if His Highness Prince Ding has any other requests?" Mo Shuyao raised his eyebrows and smiled. "Well, of course it's compensation. The South is rich and West Hill has benefited a lot from the Central Plains over the years. Has Genom of Gojoseon never thought of compensating the people of the Central Plains?" Lei Tingfeng looked at Mo Xuyao's carefree little face in silence. Actually, Lei Jinting and Lei Tingfeng were wrong to say that the West Hill had treated the people of the Central Plains. After all, Shiling and the northern tribes were different. Although they belonged to two different countries, they were of the same origin. Moreover, Enchanting had always treated the place as his own territory. In terms of intelligence, Enchanting's ability was not something Mo Jingli or Mo Jingqi could compare to. Therefore, in general, the lives of these people were not bad. However, Lei Tingfeng was the one who had lost the war and was the one who had taken the initiative to invade. As the victim and the victor, he had no reason to refuse the compensation. Taking a deep breath, Lei Tingfeng lowered his eyes and said, West Hill can compensate the Prince Ding mansion with 30 million taels of silver. Mo Xiao shook his head. 80 million taels. Most of West Hill's silver mines are in the south. West Hill should be able to afford this, right? Lei Tingfeng's expression changed. He shook his head and said, at most 40 million taels. Mo Xiao naturally understood the logic of asking for a sky-high price and asking for a low price. He tilted his head and smiled at Yi Li, then raised his hand to Lei Tingfeng and said, 70 million taels. No, 45 million taels. Prince Ding West Hill cannot afford a higher price. He really can't. I can't do anything. What he meant was that Prince Ding's price was too high. If West Hill could not afford it, then they might as well fight to the death. Mo Xiao looked at Yi Li and Qin Xiufu with some regret. He smiled and said, well, let's round it up. 50 million taels. Lei Tingfeng's face was livid. He said in a low voice, okay, pay it over 3 years. Mo Xiao was not short of money. 3 years was not a long time, so he was not in a hurry. He nodded with satisfaction and said, no problem. Then I thank Genom of Gojoseon for your understanding. I will immediately order Murong Xin and Marquis Nan to withdraw their troops. I hope West Hill will also abide by the agreement? Of course. Lei Tingfeng said in a low voice. Lei Tingfeng agreed readily. Mo Xiao was also in a good mood. He nodded with satisfaction and said, great. In that case, let's leave the rest of the trivial matters to the subordinates. Let ministers who be in charge of this matter. Qin Xiufu was stunned. He quickly stood up and said, yes, sir. Qin Xiufu understood that this was trust in him and also a test for him. The matter of negotiating with West Hill was left to him, a West Hill citizen, to be in charge. Even if Prince Ding had expressed his trust in him to the officials of Glass City and entrusted him with important tasks, Lei Tingfeng was stunned. He looked at Qin Xiufu and nodded. In that case, I will have to trouble Minister Qin. Today the Prince Ding mansion is busy. I will take my leave first. Qin Xiufu said indifferently, Genom of Gojoseon is too serious. Mo Xiao nodded and said, then I will not accompany Genom of Gojoseon. Minister Zhuo, I will leave West Hill's matters to you. Yes, Genom of Gojoseon, please. Lei Tingfeng and Qin Xiufu said their goodbyes and left the flower hall. Yi Li looked at the empty doorway and said indifferently, Lei Tingfeng, compared to Enchanting, he is still a little inexperienced. Mo Xiao smiled and said, it is already not bad. He can't become the second Enchanting in the border city after Enchanting's death. Also, he can't become Enchanting. But to be able to endure is already not bad. Enchanting had fought his way out of the many princes of the late West Hill Emperor. Even though he did not sit on the throne, he took over the power after the late West Hill Emperor passed away. This ability was not something that Lei Tingfeng, who had been pampered and protected by Enchanting since he was young, could have. It was already very good that Lei Tingfeng could hold his ground at the crucial moment and endure when he needed to. In time he should become a good lord of preservation. But to be as awe-inspiring as when Enchanting was still around, it would be a little difficult. Li, why do you care about how he is? You should think about how we are going to spend the 40 million compensation from West Hill. Mo Xiao hugged Yi Li and laughed softly. 40 million was definitely not a small amount for the Prince Ding mansion or West Hill. Otherwise, Lei Tingfeng would not have insisted on paying it off in 3 years. With this money, the Prince Ding mansion's losses from the war over the past few years would basically be covered. Not to mention the territory under the Prince Ding mansion's control today, which was close to 4/5 of the former Dechu state's territory and 1/3 of West Hill's territory. Now the Prince Ding mansion's area was larger than the existing West Hill and Dechu states combined. Now that everything had been temporarily settled, all the benefits had been taken by the Prince Ding mansion. Yi Li looked curiously at Mo Xiao and asked, how do you want to spend it? The war compensation was naturally put into the Prince Ding mansion's treasury. Obviously, Emo Shuyao had no room to spend it however he wanted. Yi Li and Emo Shuyao had always separated public from private matters. Even if the entire Prince Ding mansion belonged to them, the two of them would never use the money in the public account for personal use. Fortunately, the two of them were not people who liked extravagance, so they never had to worry about money. Emo Shuyao played with Yi Li's hair. Thinking about Yi Li's words, he felt a bit helpless. I want to build a beautiful palace for Miss Li. Seeing his dejected appearance, Yi Li couldn't help but smile. A few days ago you said that you would accompany me to go sightseeing in a few years. When your palace is built, who will live in it? Emo Shuyao raised his head to look at her and said seriously, I want to give Miss Li the most magnificent and exquisite palace, the most beautiful clothes and jewelry, and the most exquisite delicacies. As long as Li wants it, I will find it for Miss Li. Yi Li smiled at him and said with a faint smile, I didn't know that I had the potential to be a beauty who could destroy a country. A waste of money and manpower. I just want our family to be safe and happy together. I just want to be able to do what I want to do. After so many years, seeing that we can live peacefully and happily, I feel like I've already gotten what I want. Miss Li has never told me what she wants. Emo Shuyao said with a bit of regret and unwillingness. Miss Li did not have any extravagant desires for power, clothes and jewelry. Even Emo Shuyao was not sure what she liked or hated. This was something that Prince Ding was always worried about. Because what I want you've already given me. Yi Li said with a faint smile. Given you? Emo Shuyao was a bit confused. Yi Li leaned into his embrace and said softly, a lifetime, a generation, a pair. Only this is what I want. Emo Shuyao stilled. He raised a hand to tightly wrap around her slender waist and said in a low voice, a lifetime, a generation, a pair. Emo Shuyao in this life only has Miss Li, there was no oath or pledge of eternal love. Emo Shuyao just said it lightly. It was like a simple statement, but it was more comforting than any oath. Yi Li nodded slightly, I know. I also feel the same. Qin Xiufu accompanied Lei Tingfeng out of the study. The two walked side by side. Lei Tingfeng looked at Qin Xiufu beside him and couldn't help but smile. It seems that Mr. Xiuding is greatly valued by Prince Ding and Wang Fei in the Prince Ding mansion? Qin Xiufu said seriously. Qin Xiuding is very grateful for Prince and Wang Fei's kindness. Lei Tingfeng thought for a moment and asked with a smile, if I am willing to make you the Prime Minister of West Hill, would you be willing to deign to return to West Hill and assist I? Qin Xiufu looked at him calmly for a moment and shook his head gently. A loyal minister will not serve two masters. Qin Xiuding does not dare to claim to be loyal, but I am also not a two-faced and indecisive person. Qin Xiuding does not dare to accept Genom of Gojoseon's kindness. Lei Tingfeng was originally just testing him. Naturally, he didn't expect Qin Xiufu to change sides and return to West Hill so easily. But Lei Tingfeng felt a little uncomfortable after being rejected so cleanly by Qin Xiufu. He stopped and looked at Qin Xiufu asking, does Mr. Xiuding have any advice on the current situation of West Hill? This, you should be able to say. Qin Xiufu hesitated for a moment and finally said, a ruler is not a ruler, a minister is not a minister, or a minister is not a minister, or a minister is strong and a master is weak. This is not the way to go in the long run. Genom of Gojoseon should make plans early. Lei Tingfeng was stunned and wanted to ask again, but Qin Xiufu didn't intend to say anything more. He turned sideways and raised his hand to Lei Tingfeng. Genom of Gojoseon, please. Lei Tingfeng could only suppress the questions in his heart and nodded. Prime Minister Qin, please. Chapter 1079. Qin Xiufu and Lei Tingfeng walked out of the gate and two people appeared at the corner of the corridor. One of the two men was dressed in snow-white clothes, while the other was dressed in fiery red clothes. Feng Jiao looked at the place where the two men stood and frowned. Prince gave Mr. Xiuding the matter of West Hill to handle. Will there be any problem? It was not that he did not believe in Qin Xiufu's loyalty to the Prince Ding mansion, but Qin Xiufu was originally from West Hill. It was more troublesome to give this matter to him than to an ordinary subordinate of the Prince Ding mansion. Qin Xiufu might be put in an awkward position. Su Qingchen shook his head slightly and said indifferently, with Mr. Xiuding's ability, it is not difficult to handle this matter. His character is absolutely trustworthy. Therefore Prince Ding handed this matter to him to handle. As long as he can handle this matter well, he will be able to sit firmly in the position of left prime minister. No one can say anything. Feng Xiao nodded. Anyway, he was far inferior to Mo Xiuyao and Su Qingchen when it came to guessing people's minds. Since these two people felt that there was no problem, naturally there was no problem. The week of catching is about to begin, but these two parents are missing. Let's go and remind them. Otherwise the guests will wait for a long time. Su Qingchen smiled faintly and said, "They are in the study. I will go to the inner yard to bring Lin and Enrich out. I will have to trouble you to inform them." Feng Xiao watched Mr. Qingchen leave and shrugged. He turned and walked in the direction of the study. The Prince Ding Mansion's week of catching was set at noon after lunch. After the guests came to the mansion to watch the two little princes and the little princess's week of catching, they could directly participate in the evening banquet after a short rest. In fact, for 1-year-old children, the so-called evening banquet was not important. Those who participated were all adults. For them, the most important thing was catching. In the inner courtyard, Hua Tianxiang and the others were circling around the two babies. Because they were worried that the babies would be sleepy, they had coaxed them to sleep in the morning. When Su Qingchen arrived, the two babies had just woken up and were full of energy. Especially the more lively Lin, he was crawling here and there. He even wanted to climb up and down. The girls and the child's wet nurse could only keep an eye on him, afraid that he would accidentally bump into something. Exener, on the other hand, was quite quiet. She just sat on the soft couch obediently and watched her brother walk around on the floor. She clapped her little hands and cheered as she crawled around. Hearing his sister's voice, Lin became even more excited and began to toss and turn even more violently. "Yaya, Nithogo." On the soft couch, Exener pointed at the door and called out happily. Everyone looked at the door and saw Su Qingchen standing at the door looking at Exener with a smile. Mo Wuyu pinched Exener's little face and smiled. "Little girl, when the time comes, you'll be smart enough to call me uncle and recognize people." Su Qingchen came in and bent down to carry Exener. He smiled and said, "Exener, are you calling uncle?" "Hee. For a long time." "Oh." Exener obviously liked this uncle of hers very much. She sat in Su Qingchen's arms and giggled non-stop. Lin looked at his sister and then at Su Qingchen, who was standing in front of him. He walked over shakily and tugged at Su Qingchen's clothes. "Hug, sister." Su Qingchen looked at Exener in his arms and then at Lin who was tugging at his clothes. His face stiffened. Everyone looked at the elegant young Master Qingchen carrying a child in one hand and another child tugging at his clothes at his feet. They suddenly felt that this scene was funny no matter how they looked at it. Young Master Qingchen and the matter of carrying a child seemed to be completely unrelated. Mo Wuyu leaned on Hua Tianxiang's shoulder and covered his mouth to stifle his laughter. Su Qingchen looked at the two babies in front of him helplessly. Although young Master Qingchen was famous, Su Qingchen's children were not very popular. For example, Su Jirue from the Su family and Leng Junhan, who was like a little demon, did not like to get close to Su Qingchen. However, it was clear that the children of the Prince Ding Mansion would like this uncle very much. Su Qingchen could only put Exener down helplessly. He squatted down and hugged the two babies in his arms. The excited babies smiled and comforted him. "Big brother, why are you here too?" At the door, Yili looked at everyone with a smile. Behind him, Mo Xiuyao glanced at the two children who were playing happily in Su Qingchen's arms. He walked forward and reached out to Exener. Exener blinked her bright eyes and smiled innocently at Mo Xiuyao. "Daddy, hug." Yang. Mo Xiuyao carried his daughter in his arms proudly. Lin leaned in Su Qingchen's arms and blinked at Mo Xiuyao. He pouted and turned around to face Mo Xiuyao with his butt. Children, especially children who had been together all the time, would always want to do whatever one of them did. Lin might not really like Mo Xiuyao hugging him, but seeing that Mo Xiuyao only hugged his sister and ignored him, he still felt unhappy. Mo Xiuyao bent down and picked Lin up from Su Qingchen's arms. He smiled and said, "Little brat, you know how to be jealous of your sister at such a young age?" Lin didn't feel uncomfortable being picked up by his clothes. Instead, he shook his little body and giggled. Mo Xiuyao had always been gentle and loving when he carried his daughters, but he wasn't so polite when he carried a boy. Even Mo Xiaobao was carried around when he was young. Yili stepped forward and took Lin from his arms. She glanced at him reproachfully before looking at Su Qingchen with a smile. "Big brother, are you free now? I didn't expect you to come here. Su Qingchen glanced at Emo Xiuyao unhappily and said, How could I be free? Father, second uncle and chief steward Emo are watching outside. I came in to rest for a while. Also, the auspicious hour is about to arrive. I came to see if Lin and Xan are ready. Emo Xiuyao didn't mind. What do they need to prepare? Wasn't it just a matter of putting things on the table and letting them grab whatever they wanted? Su Qingchen smiled but didn't say anything. She walked to the side and sat down. She looked around the room and asked, Aren't Xiaobao and the others here? Hua Tianxiang said, They just said it was boring in the inner courtyard and wanted to go out and watch the fun. Su Qingchen frowned and nodded. Tell them to be careful. There are a lot of people today. Emo Xiuyao smiled. I sent people to follow them. Nothing will happen. Not long after, the auspicious hour arrived. The ceremony was set to be held in the main hall of the Prince Ding Mansion's front yard. When Emo Xiuyao and Yi Li arrived with the two babies, the main hall was already filled with guests. Lei Tingfing, Emo Jingyu, Yelu Hong and the other envoys were all present. Even Pu A, who had just been injured and was worried about the safety of Princess Anqi and the little prince, was present. There were also the civil and military officials of the Prince Ding Mansion. As long as they were in Glass City, they were all high-ranking officials. Naturally, the one sitting at the head of the table was the white-haired Sir Qingyun. Seeing Yi Li and Emo Xiuyao arrive together, everyone hurriedly stood up to greet them. Chapter 1080. Grandfather. Yi Li walked in front of Master Qingyun and lightly smiled. Master Qingyun smiled as he took Lin from her hands and smiled. I haven't seen you for a month. These two children have grown up a bit. Yi Li nodded and smiled. Children grow up quickly. It won't be long before they can run around. Lin call me Tai Gong. Although Lin was still young, he was very clever. In the past year he had seen Master Qingyun quite a bit, so he naturally had an impression of this white-bearded old man. He happily grabbed Master Qingyun's white beard and called out, Tai Gong. Master Qingyun's wrinkled face also revealed a kind smile. Good child. Lin is obedient. Tai Gong. Xan who was in Emo Xiuyao's embrace, was not to be outdone. The smile on Master Qingyun's face deepened. Whether it was the Su family or the Prince Ding Mansion, girls were very rare. Naturally they were loved even more. Master Qingyun repeatedly nodded and said, Good child. Lin and Xan are both very good. Master Qingyun took out a pair of jade pendants and gave one to Lin and Xan. Yi Li lowered her head to look. It was a pair of Qi Lin and Phoenix jade pendants. The jade was the highest quality mutton fat white jade. It was completely white and lustrous without any impurities. The carving was very exquisite and Yi Li felt that it was very familiar. Yi Li remembered that she also had a jade pendant like this. However, it was made of green jade and carved with magnolia flowers. It was given to her by her grandfather when she was born. It was said that her grandfather personally carved it. Everyone only knew that Master Qingyun was extremely talented, but they didn't know that Master Qingyun was also proficient in many other skills. Even the art of carving that normal scholars would not be interested in could be called a master. These two jade pendants were clearly carved by Master Qingyun himself. Master Qingyun was now over 80 years old. It was not easy for him to carve these two exquisite jade pendants. Yi Li's eyes were slightly red. She looked at Master Qingyun and said in a low voice, Grandfather. Lin and Xan are still young. You don't have to. Master Qingyun shook his head. As he played with Lin in his arms, he said, It's not good for children to carry ancient jade around. This jade is not bad. It's perfect to make a jade pendant for the two children. What's wrong with that? Xan was still in Emo Xiuyao's hands. She held the jade pendant in one hand and waved at Master Qingyun excitedly. Grandpa. Great-grandpa. Pinchin hug. As she spoke, she kicked her legs and wanted to walk towards Master Qingyun. Emo Xiuyao had no choice but to place her on Mr. Qingyun's couch. Fortunately, the couch was very wide. Because Master Qingyun was old, he had specially laid out a thick cushion, so he didn't have to worry about her bumping into anything. Seeing his great-granddaughter being so close to him, even Mr. Qingyun couldn't help but smile. The people sitting below looked at this family and couldn't help but feel emotional. Whether it was Yi Li, Emo Xiuyao or the Su family, they were all very eye-catching people. Now that so many people were standing around Master Qingyun and laughing, it made people feel that the heavens really were biased. Looking at the two little children sitting next to Master Qingyan, everyone couldn't help but reveal an expression of jealousy and envy. Yi Li, who was standing beside Mr. Qingyan, was stunned when she looked down. She saw that in an inconspicuous corner not far from the palace, Yi Wenhua was standing there alone. His expression was a bit complicated as he looked at her. Or it could be said that he was looking at Lin Er, who was holding her hand and babbling non-stop. Ever since Yi Wenhua came to Glass City, he rarely went out. He rarely even saw outsiders, so there weren't many people who could recognize him. Seeing that Yi Li was stunned, Mo Shuyao also looked over. Naturally, he also saw Yi Wenhua. Gently hugging Yi Li, Mo Shuyao said softly, "Li, if you have anything to say, just say it to him." Mo Shuyao didn't really like or dislike Yi Wenhua. The most he disliked was that he felt that Yi Li was wronged by Yi Wenhua. Although it couldn't be said that it was all because of Yi Wenhua, at least Yi Wenhua as a father didn't treat Yi Li well. In these few years, Yi Wenhua had been well behaved in Glass City. He didn't use his identity as Princess Ding's father to have any delusions. Therefore, Mo Shuyao's attitude towards him was a bit better. Occasionally, during festivals, he would have people send some gifts to the Yi family. After all, no matter how close Yi Li was to the Su family, her surname was still Yi. Compared to her family in the Prince Ding mansion, who was poor and couldn't make a living, spending some money to let Yi Wenhua enjoy his old age was obviously better for Yi Li's reputation. Of course, this was on the premise that Yi Wenhua was well behaved and knew when to advance or retreat. Yi Li sighed slightly and nodded. Towards Yi Wenhua, this father, she really didn't have any feelings. No matter if it was love or hate, she didn't have any feelings. She just felt sorry for her mother. Yi Li's impression of Yi Wenhua couldn't even compare to her parents in her previous life, who had been together for more than 20 years. Even though her parents in her previous life were just as busy, they didn't spend much time together when they were young. After entering the military academy, they rarely saw each other once a year. However, they still left a deeper impression on her than Yi Wenhua. "Father." In the quiet side hall, Yi Li calmly looked at Yi Wenhua, who had already aged a little. Yi Wenhua was only in his early 50s, but his hair was already white. He was wearing an inconspicuous scholar's robe. Compared to more than 10 years ago when he was in Chujing City, he looked more like a scholar. They hadn't seen each other for more than a year, and Yi Wenhua had also aged a lot. Yi Yu and Yi Ying had passed away in the past year. These two were Yi Wenhua's beloved daughters. No matter what, he couldn't help but feel sad. Yi Li. Seeing Yi Li walk in, Yi Wenhua looked a little embarrassed. He used to think that his first wife's daughter was inconspicuous. He used to hate her. He used to think that he didn't have a daughter. Now she had grown into a legendary woman who was admired by the whole world without him as her father. Actually, as a father, he couldn't help much. Yi Wenhua smiled bitterly. "Father, please sit down," Yi Li said softly. Speaking of which, this time the subordinates in the Prince Ding mansion didn't think it through. They forgot to send an invitation to the Yi family for Lin Er and Xin Er's first birthday party. Of course, a large part of this was caused by Yi Li and Mo Shuyao's attitude. Yi Wenhua nodded and sat down. Immediately, a maid came over to serve tea and then left. The two of them drank tea in silence for a while. Yi Li then asked, "Long time no see. Father, how are you?" Good. Your grandmother is also very good." Yi Wenhua nodded. Yi Li smiled faintly. If she didn't have any feelings for Yi Wenhua, then she didn't have any feelings for old Madame Yi either. After all, Yi Wenhua loved her when she was young. After her mother passed away, he would occasionally help her. However, old Madame Yi didn't like her mother when her mother was still alive. When she looked at her, there were no feelings other than calculation and indifference in her eyes. Yi Wenhua also understood that Yi Li wasn't interested in this topic. He raised his hand and took out a wooden box from his sleeve. He put it on the table and said, "Today is the two children's birthday. This is my gift to them." Chapter 1081. Yi Li took the wooden box from Qin Feng and opened it. She looked at Yi Wenhua in surprise. There was a piece of warm jade and a pair of jade bells in the old box carved from red sandalwood. She had seen the warm jade before. It was said to be a family heirloom of the Yi family. It was a very valuable piece of warm jade. Old Madame Yi used it to show off. It was said that the ancestors of the Yi family were from a prestigious family. Later, when Wang gave birth to Yi Rong, Yi Wenhua didn't give it to her even though she wanted it. Although she had never seen the jade bells before, they were definitely more valuable than the warm jade. The delicate bells were carved out of white suet jade. There were 2 jade beads in the hollow and delicate patterns. They jingled when shaken gently. It was very pleasant to hear. "This is too valuable," Yili said. The Yi family was no longer the Yi family in Chujing City. Moreover, the Yi family was not rich. The 2 gifts that Yi Wenhua gave were probably more valuable than all the assets of the Yi family combined. Yi Wenhua waved his hand and rejected the box that Qin Feng brought back. He said, "I only have these 2 things that I can take out to show people. If I give them to the 2 children, they can be playthings. If I leave them in the Yi family, they will be gone soon. Moreover, these jade bells were left behind by your mother. Just give them to Xin'er to play with." Seeing that Yi Wenhua was so insistent, Yili had no choice but to accept them. She said softly, "I thank you on behalf of the 2 children." Yi Wenhua shook his head and didn't say anything. Yili thought for a while and asked, "Is Su Yun okay?" When Su Qingchen came back from Jiangnan, she brought Mo Su Yun back. But Mo Su Yun was weak and timid. No one from the Prince Ding mansion or the Su family took care of him. Yili had discussed with Su Qingchen to send the children to the Yi family. Yi Wenhua sighed, "He is okay." He had changed his name to Yi Su. That child had suffered a lot and was not very courageous. And his body. Mo Su Yun's body was really ruined beyond recognition. Even if Xin Yang and Dr. Lin personally checked his pulse, they both shook their heads, indicating that they were not sure that Mo Su Yun could live past the age of 20. In the past 6 months, Mo Wu Yu would visit him every half a month to check on him. It was just a matter of dragging it out. Mo Wu Yu didn't know that Mo Su Yun wasn't Mo Jingqi's son, so he pitied his half-brother. Yili said, "If his body needs any medicine, just let Worryless come to the Prince Ding mansion to get it." Yi Wenhua nodded. The father and daughter were speechless. After a long while, Yi Wenhua said in a low voice, "Li Ying'er's funeral." Yili looked down and said softly, "Fourth sister didn't want to leave the Li palace. After she died, Li Wang used the power of the princess to bury her." Yi Wenhua let out a long sigh and said, "That's good, that's good." In the first half of his life he had been obsessed with fame and fortune. He had taught his only son badly. Among his daughters, only Yi Li, the daughter of the first wife, lived a peaceful life. Yi Li was the only one who lived a happy life. But this kind of happiness was obtained by Yi Li after going through many things. These years, although Yi Wenhua didn't go out, he knew what he should know. The things that Yi Li went through these years, not to mention ordinary women, even most men couldn't bear it. As a father, he had nothing to say except for pride. Looking at Yi Wenhua's old and sad appearance, Yi Li couldn't help but feel sad. With a sigh, Yi Li asked, "Father, do you still remember concubine Zhao?" Yi Wenhua was stunned. After a long while, he remembered that he had such a favored concubine in the past. Concubine Zhao was very favored for a period of time. Otherwise, Madame Wang wouldn't have thought of her as a threat. But her status was too low and the time she spent with Yi Wenhua was too short. In the blink of an eye, more than 10 years had passed. Yi Wenhua didn't have a deep impression of her. Didn't she go to Yunzhou? Yi Wenhua was puzzled. He didn't understand why Yi Li would mention this woman who hadn't been heard from for more than 10 years. Yi Li nodded and said, "That's right. Father, do you still remember that she was 3 months pregnant when she left Chujing?" "You mean she?" Yi Wenhua couldn't help but stand up in shock. After receiving Qin Feng's warning gaze, he realized that he had forgotten himself. But the impact of the child was too big for him. Yi Li nodded calmly and said, "That's right. I knew it before the news spread. She came to me and begged me that Madame Wang would hurt her and the child. But I was about to marry into the Prince Ding mansion at that time. I didn't have time to care about her. So I suggested that she go to Yunzhou. In Yunzhou, the Su family could take care of her more or less." The child is?" Yi Wenhua asked carefully. Yi Rong had completely disappointed him. If the child was a boy, it would be Yi Wenhua's only hope. But if it was a girl, Yi Wenhua was a little uneasy. Yi Li looked down and said lightly, "It's a boy. He's 12 years old this year. When the child was born, concubine Zhao wrote to me and asked about it. I named the child Yin." "Thank you. As a father, I have always..." Yi Wenhua's eyes were red. He looked at Yi Li guiltily. All these years Yi Wenhua had thought about the child. But when he sent people to look for the child, the Yi family's residence in Yunzhou had already changed owners. Concubine Zhao was also nowhere to be found. Yili shook her head and said, "The child is now studying in Lishan Academy." Not long after the Su family moved to Glass City, concubine Zhao also sold the residence in Yunzhou and moved to Glass City. Now she bought some land not far from Lishan Academy and is living there. Thank you, Li Er. Yi Wenhua didn't know what else to say. He could only repeat it. Yi Li smiled and said lightly, "Don't mention it. He's also my brother. Father, if you have time you can go and see concubine Zhao and Xian. I also heard that Madame Wang has been making trouble for the past 2 years." Yi Wenhua was stunned and quickly said, "Don't worry. I will control them well. I won't let the Yi family ruin your reputation." Yi Li shook her head lightly and didn't say anything. Chapter 1082. Princess Consort. Zhuojing walked into the side hall and looked at Yi Li and Yi Wenhua before greeting respectfully. Yi Li nodded and asked with a smile, "What's the matter?" Zhuojing said, "His Highness said that the little heir and little princess's catching ceremony is about to begin and asked the princess to attend." Yi Li nodded and asked, "Has the heir arrived?" Zhuojing shook his head and said, "I haven't seen the heir." Yi Li helplessly indicated for Zhuojing to go find Imo Xiaobao first. She stood up and smiled at Yi Wenhua. "Father, let's go. It's about to start." Yi Wenhua paused and quickly nodded, "All right, let's go." When they entered the main hall, it was already bustling with noise and excitement. The Prince Ding mansion had prepared a large table that was 5 to 6 feet long. There were all kinds of things on it. Su Qingyan and Su Qingfeng each held one in their arms. When they saw Yi Li walk over, they immediately stretched out their little hands towards Yi Li happily. Yi Li smiled and stroked the babies' little faces asking, "Has it started?" Chief Steward Mo said in a low voice, "The auspicious hour has arrived. The prince and princess can begin to catch the prince." Yi Li clapped her hands and smiled, "Let them pass." Su Qingyan giggled as he placed Lin Er on the table. Su Qingfeng also placed Xin Er on the table. The two babies looked curiously at everything in front of them. Although there were so many pairs of eyes staring at them, the two babies did not have stage fright. Instead they excitedly fiddled with the things on the table. Xin Er picked up a small abacus made of gold and curiously fiddled with it. Han Mingxi couldn't help but smile. Could it be that the princess wants to be a wealthy merchant in the future? Before he finished speaking, Xin Er giggled and quickly stuffed the small abacus into Lin Er's arms. Lin Er looked at the little toy in his hands suspiciously. He tilted his little head and thought for a moment. Then he turned his little body and placed the little abacus behind him. Then he grabbed a book beside him and stuffed it into Xin Er's arms. Xin Er did not dare to show weakness. She chuckled as she grabbed a pen not far away and stuffed it into Lin Er's hands. Thus, under the watchful eyes of the crowd, the two siblings started to play with one another. Feng Jiao stared dumbfoundedly at the siblings who were still playing happily in front of him. What are they doing? Yi Li looked at the small piles of things behind the siblings and couldn't help but smile. She didn't know what they were doing. After thinking about it, Yi Li clapped her hands and smiled at the two babies. Lin, pick something you like and give it to mother. It wasn't clear whether the two children understood Yi Li's words or not, but when they saw Yi Li open her arms, Lin took the lead and got up first after a moment of hesitation. He walked up and down the long table and soon came back with a pair of things. Among them there was an exquisite little sword, a small red sandalwood box and a picture scroll. However, his two small hands couldn't hold so many things. He had only taken a few steps when they fell to the ground. He thought for a moment and pushed the picture scroll in Xin Er's direction. He picked up the little sword and the red sandalwood box and continued to walk forward. Halfway through, he casually threw the box aside and picked up a green jade seal. Then he held the little sword in one hand and the seal in the other and walked towards Yi Li's direction. Congratulations to the little heir for your unparalleled martial arts in the future. You'll be able to command thousands of troops and horses. As it turned out, the last seal that Lin picked up was a military commander's seal. Lin threw himself into Yi Li's arms and handed the commander's seal to Yi Li. "Mother, Lin is good." Yi Li smiled as she hugged her son. She lowered her head and kissed his little head. She smiled and said, "And Lin is good." Exen who was still sitting on the table, pursed her lips when she saw that her brother had left. He calmly glanced at the surrounding crowd and slowly began to move as well. Although she was the older sister, her steps were not as steady as Lin Nur's. After a few steps, she stopped and continued to crawl around the table. When she saw something that she liked, she would pull it towards the place where she had been sitting. Soon there was a large pile of things around her. Weapons and toys that boys liked, jewelry that girls liked, jewelry, books, brushes and ink that one could think of. When she felt that it was enough, she sat there and didn't move anymore. Yili didn't know whether to laugh or cry. Xener, choose something that you like and bring it over. Xener looked at Yili and hesitated for a moment. She lowered her head and looked at the pile of things in front of her. Her big, bright eyes turned and she crawled towards the table. Everyone was afraid that she would fall and quickly went forward. Xener grabbed the sleeve of Su Qingyan, who was closest to her, and crawled back. She brought Su Qingyan to her pile of things and then stared at him with wide eyes. Su Qingyan was speechless. Seeing that everyone was looking at him, he could only rub his nose helplessly and ask, Xener, do you want uncle to help you carry it? Xener giggled. Su Qingyan could only ask, which one do you want? Xener began to push the things one by one towards Su Qingyan. Su Qingchen looked helplessly at Yi Li and Emo Shuyao, not knowing whether to laugh or cry. Sister Lear, your little princess is really greedy. The people nearby also found the little princess's actions very amusing. Emo Jingyu smiled and said, it seems that the little princess has a wide range of interests. In the future she will definitely be rich and won't have to worry about anything. Everyone also congratulated Prince Ding and Princess Consort for their good fortune. In the end, only Su Qingyan was forced to help the little princess put away all the things. Because if he didn't put them away, the little princess would lie on a pair of small things and refuse to move. The pregnancy catching ceremony was actually very simple. After the two babies were caught, they were carried down. The guests who had come to watch the ceremony were invited to the garden to enjoy the scenery, drink wine and chat, while waiting for the evening banquet. The people of the Prince Ding mansion gathered in the reception pavilion. The two babies were still holding their spoils of war and playing happily in the arms of the adults. Su Qingyan had an amused expression as he held Xener. On the table beside him were Xener's spoils of war. Xener was holding an exquisite and gorgeous jewelry box in her hands and studying it attentively. Xiaobao hasn't returned yet? Yili asked with a frown. Su Qingfeng frowned and said, not yet. Zhuwei, Junhan and Qin Lai are also not in the mansion. But they should be fine. If something really happened, the people following them will come back to report. Yili looked at Emo Shuyao. Emo Shuyao smiled and nodded, saying, don't worry, Li Xiaobao and the others will be fine. Yili nodded and looked at Qin Lai, asking, how is the Queen of Nanzhao? Qin Feng frowned and said, although Princess Anxi has disguised herself, it's not to the extent that we can't recognize her. She is being led around the city. Emo Jingli probably doesn't want to do anything to Princess Anxi. He just wants to use Princess Anxi to divert our attention. Yili pondered for a moment and said, look for an opportunity. No matter what, we should save Princess Anxi first. Princess, something bad has happened. Outside the door, Director Emo hurried in to report. What happened? Emo Shuyao asked calmly. Chief Steward Emo said in a deep voice. Prince Pu heard about Princess Anxi from somewhere and rushed out with his men to save Princess Anxi. Chapter 1083. Nonsense. Yili frowned. Since the other party dared to strut around the city with Princess Anxi, they would not be unprepared. It was too risky for Pua to rush out like this. After some thought, Yili said, Shuijing, take some people and go. No, Li, will go ourselves. Emo Shuyao stood up and took Yili's hand as he spoke softly. Yili frowned slightly. The Prince Ding mansion was currently filled with guests. They needed Prince Ding to oversee things. Moreover, this matter was not serious enough to require Prince Ding and the princess to personally attend to it. Emo Shuyao smiled and said, let's go. Pua and Princess Anxi are guests. Let's go take a look. Yili sighed helplessly and said, if you say so, then let's go, third brother. Su Qingfeng smiled and said, don't worry, Li. Leave the Prince Ding mansion to us. On an inconspicuous street in Glass City. Because it was a special day, Glass City was especially lively. However, some of the more remote streets were even more deserted than usual. By the time Yi Li and Mo Xiuyao arrived, the Nanzhao guards that Puah had brought had already started fighting with Mo Jingli's men. Although Mo Jingli did not have many men, each one of them was skilled. The worst thing was that Puah's guards had forced them into a restaurant on the street. They had smashed all the wine in the restaurant. If anyone dared to step into the restaurant, they would immediately set it on fire and perish together with Princess Anxi. Seeing Yi Li and Mo Xiuyao arrive, Puah quickly went up to them and anxiously explained the situation. Prince Ding, Princess Ding. Yi Li didn't look too good either. The current situation wasn't that they couldn't beat these people, but that they were holding back. These people dared to do this because they were prepared to die. As long as they dared to act rashly, these people would ignite their fire seeds, and the entire restaurant, which was almost soaked in strong liquor, would be turned into a sea of fire. If Princess Anxi was hurt, it would be self-defeating and the losses would outweigh the gains. Puah also knew that he was being impulsive, but his wife and son had been missing for so many days. This man who was not good at patience had already reached his limit. When he heard about Princess Anxi, how could he hold himself back? Looking at Puah's guilty and vexed expression, Yi Li sighed softly in her heart. She calmly comforted him, "Don't worry, Wang Fu. The Queen of Nanzhao is blessed. Nothing will happen." Puah nodded and said, "Sorry to trouble you, Princess. Please save Anxi. Don't worry, Prince Ding Mansion. This is Glass City. The Prince Ding Mansion will do its best to protect the Queen." Yi Li gave Qin Feng a look. Qin Feng nodded and stepped forward, saying in a clear voice, "Everyone inside, listen up. Prince Ding and Princess Ding have personally arrived. Release the Queen of Nanzhao and we can spare your lives." There was a moment of silence inside. A figure appeared at the window on the second floor. He looked down at the people below and said, "We can release Princess Anxi first. Let Prince Ding and Princess Ding come in personally." "Impudent," Qin Feng said sternly, "how dare you? Do you really think that the Prince Ding Mansion can't do anything to you?" These people obviously knew that they were going to die at this point. Perhaps it was because they had nothing left to lose, but they were bolder. They smiled and said, "We naturally have a way. As long as Prince Ding gives the order to shoot, we can all be killed without a single soldier. No matter having a queen die with them, it's still worth it." Mo Xiuyao was about to speak when Yi Li raised her hand to stop him. She stepped forward and said with a smile, "If I really agree to come up with Prince Ding, would you dare?" The other party was silent. Prince Ding's martial arts were unparalleled. This was something everyone in the world knew. If they really allowed Prince Ding to go up, they really couldn't be sure what would happen. After a moment, the man sneered and said, "Thank you for your reminder, Princess. Then it's fine as long as Princess comes up alone." Although it was rumored that Princess Ding's martial arts were not bad, it was far from the level where ordinary martial arts masters would be afraid of her. They were all first and second-rate experts. It was naturally not a problem for them to deal with Ding Wangfei. Yi Li smiled. Mo Xiuyao frowned in displeasure. Even though he knew that Yi Li had a plan, Mo Xiuyao was not happy to see Yi Li take any risks in front of him. Not even for the Queen of Nanzhao. Even if the Queen and Prince of Nanzhao died in Li City, so what? Even if Nanzhao and the Prince Ding Mansion became enemies, they could not do anything to them. Yi Li gently gripped his hand and said with a comforting smile, "Don't worry, nothing will happen." Mo Xiuyao pursed his lips and looked at her in displeasure. Yi Li said with a slight smile, "I promise to come out in 15 minutes. After a moment, Mo Xiuyao let go and watched as Yi Li walked into the restaurant. Entering the restaurant, the thick smell of wine hit them in the face. The hall was littered with broken wine jars and the floor was soaked with wine. Yi Li strolled up to the second floor and saw a few men staring at her covetously. Princess Anxi sat at a table and looked at her without moving. Her eyes were filled with anxiety. "Princess Ding, don't come over." Mo Jingli took Shuo away. "Please save Shuo." Yi Li smiled and said, "Princess Anxi, don't worry. Shuo will be fine." Thinking of her son that Mo Jingli had taken away, Princess Anxi's eyes reddened. "Princess Ding, don't worry about me. As long as Shuo is fine." Yi Li sighed. This time the queen and the prince had suffered an undeserved calamity because of Ding Wangfu. How can this consort not care? Sitting at a table not far from Princess Anxi, Yi Li calmly looked at the men in front of her. They looked familiar, but she couldn't remember their names. They should be Mo Xiao's guards. He might have met them before. Gentlemen, Mo Jingli's methods are becoming more and more shameless. Using a woman and an innocent baby as hostages. The man in the lead took a step forward and sized Yili up. At this point, who cares if you're presentable or not? Princess Ding dared to risk her life for someone unrelated to her. We admire her. Unfortunately, we are on opposing sides. Please forgive us. Yili looked at him with interest and said with a smile, "Your words are quite interesting. This consort is surprised that someone like you is still loyal to Mo Jingli." The man smiled bitterly and said, "A loyal subject will not serve two masters. Moreover, His Majesty has shown me kindness." "Kindness, you are a loyal person." Yili sighed. The man looked at Yili and said, "This consort is surprised that you would risk your life alone as the consort. If this consort lit a fire now, it would be more worth it to burn Princess Ding to death than to burn the Queen of Nanzhao. No. I'm afraid that the consort will be buried with the Queen of Nanzhao?" Yili looked at him leisurely and said with a smile, "First, are you sure that I won't be able to escape after you light the fire? Second, you took the Queen of Nanzhao to wander around the city for so long. After being surrounded, you put on such a show. Do you really want to kill Princess Anxi first? You know that you will die for sure. If you really want to kill Princess Anxi, why don't you just slit her throat? Then you might be able to fight your way out." "Well, I don't know about Princess Anxi, but you all look like you have no way out. Why do you have to do this?" The man's eyes darkened. "What do you mean?" Yili covered her smile and said, "Don't you understand? I'm advising you to act quickly." The man looked at the woman in white in front of him suspiciously. She was willing to risk her life for Princess Anxi, but advised him to act quickly. This was definitely not what they had expected. However, he had been with Mo Xiao for a long time and had naturally heard about Princess Ding's cunning. Although he couldn't see through Yili's thoughts, he watched Yili's every move cautiously. Yili said with a smile, "You don't have to be so nervous. I know that you don't want to kill Princess Anxi at all. You even want her to live as long as possible." The man fell silent. Yili said with a smile, "You want to use Princess Anxi to stall me and Prince. Does Mo Jingli have other plans in secret? Is he trying to lure us away? But, does Mo Jingli really think that Prince and I will abandon everything and stay here for Princess Anxi?" The man sneered. "Princess, you're here now. Isn't that enough?" Yili helplessly sighed and said, "This imperial concubine came in to tell you that after a quarter of an hour, the secret guards of Prince Ding's residence will begin their assault." The man's face darkened. He said in a low voice, "Aren't you afraid that I'll kill the Queen of Nanzhao?" Yili said, "It's important whether she lives or dies. Isn't there an explanation? There are so many guests in the Prince Ding mansion today. How can Prince and I stay here for a long time?" Seeing the man staring at her with a serious expression, Yili sat down leisurely. She looked at the furnishings in the restaurant and said casually, "Does Mo Jingli want to cooperate with Mo Jingyu? What do you think Mo Jingyu can do?" Hearing this, the man's expression finally changed. Yili acted as if she didn't see it. She continued, "There are also some old officials and nobles of Dechu State and Glass City who are secretly helping. Even so, what can they do? Every soldier in Glass City is in the hands of Prince Ding Mansion. Can they turn Glass City upside down? Princess Ding is indeed very powerful." The man stared at Yili and said in a low voice, "Princess Ding didn't come here to gossip with us. What does Princess want?" Yili said with a smile, "Release Princess Anxi and I will consider letting bygones be bygones." The man's lips curled into a mocking smile. Obviously, he didn't believe Yili's words at all. Even if he did, he wouldn't consider it. Yili didn't care. She pondered for a moment and said, "The first option is to wait with you for an hour. Release Princess Anxi and I will let you go. The second option, after a quarter of an hour we will attack the Prince Ding mansion." "You're afraid Princess Anxi will die?" Yili looked at Princess Anxi and said apologetically, "Princess Anxi, don't worry. I swear on the reputation of the Prince Ding mansion that I will save the little prince." Princess Anxi obviously understood Yili's meaning. She said with a smile, "Princess, you can go now. Let the Prince Ding mansion's people attack immediately. Waiting a quarter of an hour or half an hour won't make any difference." Yili nodded firmly at Princess Anxi and said, "Okay." Chapter 1084. After hearing Princess Anshi's answer, Yili stood up and prepared to go downstairs. It was as if she didn't care about Princess Anshi's life at all. This kind of reaction made the few men present stunned. After all, they knew that Prince Ding was cold and heartless, but Princess Ding was very easygoing. It was impossible for her to abandon Princess Anshi. Wait, the man said in a low voice. One of the men guarding the stairs heard his leader's voice and immediately reached out to stop Yili. However, Yili's expression darkened. She raised her hand and grabbed the man's arm. With a twist of her hand, the man who was blocking her path was pushed to the ground with a muffled groan. Yili turned around and looked coldly at the man in black. I respect your loyalty, but it's best that you stop before going too far. Wait, the man in black said, we can let Princess Anshi go, but why should I believe that you won't do anything in an hour? Yili raised her eyebrows and asked, what do you want? The man in black said, Princess Ding and Prince, please wait here for an hour. After an hour we'll let Princess Anshi go. In addition, during this hour, you can't see anyone in the Prince Ding mansion. Yili lowered her eyes and thought for a moment, then nodded, okay. Let me take Princess Anshi away first. We'll wait outside. The man in black frowned and wanted to refuse. Yili said indifferently, you're right. If His Highness and I spend an hour with you, but you burn Princess Anshi in the end, who am I supposed to complain to? The man hesitated for a long time. Yili looked at his hesitant face, then shook her head and turned to leave. Princess Ding, come out if you agree. If you don't, stay here. If I don't come out in 15 minutes, Prince Ding will come in personally. She watched as Yili's figure leisurely disappeared at the top of the stairs. The people upstairs looked at each other. Boss, what should we do? The leading man in black pondered for a long time before finally sighing and saying, let's go out. But what if Princess Ding was lying? They could still hold on to this house that was filled with strong liquor to prevent them from shooting at the rat for fear of breaking the vases. Once they vented their anger, the Mahist army lying in ambush outside would be enough to turn them into hedgehogs. The black-robed man smiled bitterly and helplessly. Princess Ding had already arrived just now. We had already lost by not killing her immediately. Furthermore, Princess Ding was right. How much did the life and death of the Queen of Nanzhao have to do with the Prince Ding mansion? Even if Nanzhao wants to become enemies with the Prince Ding mansion because of this, if they want to cause trouble for the Prince Ding mansion, they have to go through the West Hill and Dechu state first. Moreover, he doubted which country would dare to cause trouble for the Prince Ding mansion. Are we just going to go out like this? The black-robed man gritted his teeth and said, let's gamble that Princess Ding will keep her promise. She will die anyway. If she can delay for an hour for His Majesty, she will be loyal. The others were silent. No matter if it was loyalty or other reasons, they had no way out now that they had come this far. The boss was right. They could not avoid death no matter what. Compared to being burned to death, they would rather die with an arrow through the heart. Outside the restaurant, Yili stood beside Emo Xiuyao. Puah stood behind them and looked inside nervously. After a while, they finally saw Princess Anshi being escorted out of the restaurant slowly. Anshi, Puah called out anxiously. Princess Anshi shook her head to show that she was fine. Emo Xiuyao glanced at the crowd and said, since they are already out, let her go. The men looked at Emo Xiuyao warily and did not move. Emo Xiuyao snorted disdainfully and said, the princess consort has already told I. If I wanted to break the contract, you would be dead the moment you stepped out. Let her go. The black-robed man holding Princess Anshi down paused for a moment, then finally let go of Princess Anshi's hand. As soon as she was free, Princess Anshi rushed over. Puah hugged Princess Anshi excitedly. Anshi, are you okay? I'm fine. Princess Anshi said emotionally. But our child. Puah is with Mo Jingli. His wife's safe return calmed Puah down. Although he was also worried about his son's disappearance, he looked at Emo Xiuyao and Yili with more respect and confidence. Don't be afraid, don't be afraid. Sure, we'll be fine. On the side, Emo Xiuyao pulled Yili to a chair that the guards of the Prince Ding mansion had brought over from somewhere. It was rare that Emo Xiuyao would keep his promise to the enemy. He sat under the faint sunlight and waited for an hour to pass. The black-robed man looked at the white-haired Prince Ding leaning against Princess Ding with his eyes closed. A complicated expression flashed across his face. There was awe, helplessness, regret, and information. In fact, when he decided to go out, he could not be sure that Prince Ding would keep his promise. It was already very good that he was able to resolve the situation like this. At the same time, it also showed the difference between Prince Ding and Prince Li. He knew that if his master Mo Jingli was in this situation, Mo Jingli would never keep his promise. Princess consort, a shadow guard hurried over and said in a low voice, "Young Master Qingshan has sent someone to ask the prince to return to the residence immediately." Mo Shuyao opened his eyes and said calmly, "What is it?" The shadow guard hesitated for a moment and said in a low voice, "The little heir has not been found yet." Mo Shuyao sat up and glanced at the group of black-robed men standing not far away and looking at them warily. He looked down calmly and said, "I know. Let young Master Qingshan do as he sees fit." After all, something had happened to the little heir, but the prince was not moved at all. This made the shadow guard a little worried. But when he met Mo Xuyao's calm eyes, the shadow guard's heart trembled. He quickly said, "This subordinate understands. This subordinate will take his leave." Hearing that Mo Xiaobao had not been found, Yili frowned slightly. She lowered her head and looked at Mo Xuyao's hand that was holding hers. It was dry and steady. She couldn't help but relax. She slowly leaned back in her chair and accompanied Mo Xuyao as they waited for the time to come. An hour passed by. Some people felt like time had passed by while others felt like a year had passed. When the time finally came to an end, Mo Xuyao pulled Yili and slowly stood up. Big brother Ping Jing looked at the man in black in front of him and said, "I will spare your life. Go back and tell Mo Jingli. Don't forget. His son is still in I's hands." With that, Mo Xuyao pulled Yili and left without looking back. Looking at Mo Xuyao's departing figure, the man in black let out a long sigh. When they were face to face, the pressure that Prince Ding gave off was absolutely unbearable. He raised his hand and wiped his forehead. The sweat on his forehead had already soaked half of his hair. Swoosh swoosh swoosh. The sound of arrows piercing through the air rang out. The man in black vigilantly jumped to the side. The moment he landed, an arrow nailed him to the back of his foot. When he turned back, the men who had been following him had all fallen to the ground. Not far away, a man in black holding a bow and arrow sat on the roof. He said calmly, "Don't be afraid. Prince said to spare your life. We won't shoot at you." Chapter 1085. Seeing that person quickly disappear behind the eaves, the black-clothed man only felt his entire body turn cold. After a long while, he turned and madly ran towards the intersection. Mo Xuyao and Yili returned to the palace. Su Qingshan was anxiously waiting in the study. "Big brother." Su Qingshan's handsome face was gloomy. He said unhappily, "Why are you only back now?" Mo Xuyao said indifferently, "What happened?" Su Qingshan picked up a letter from the table and handed it over, saying, "Xiao Bao has fallen into Mo Jingli's hands. Mo Jingli had someone deliver this letter." Yili took the letter and looked. It was indeed Mo Jingli's handwriting. Between the lines there was malice and smugness. Su Qingshan sat down, looked at them unhappily and asked, "What happened?" So many people were watching Xiao Bao, how could he still fall into Mo Jingli's hands? Mo Xuyao looked at the letter Yili handed over and said calmly, "Don't worry, Xiao Bao will be fine." Su Qingshan looked at Mo Xuyao for a long time, then snorted, "You set this up again? Be careful that you don't fall for your own cleverness." Mo Xuyao smiled helplessly. "This wasn't set up by me." Mo Xuyao looked anxiously at Yili. "Why do I feel so resentful?" Su Qingshan frowned slightly. "Mo Xiao Bao?" Mo Xuyao blinked innocently. "So, it really had nothing to do with I." Su Qingshan looked at Mo Xuyao and sneered. "Just let him do as he pleases if something happens, brother Qingshan," Mo Xuyao said with a faint smile. "Xiao Bao will be 11 soon, he's not a child anymore. If we don't let him do as he pleases, we will never be at ease. Besides, with someone watching him, nothing will happen. If something really happened, there's no way the people around him wouldn't have come back to report." Su Qingshan shook her head helplessly. She sighed and said, "Forget it. Even you, the father, aren't worried. Why should I be? Big brother is naturally doing this for Xiao Bao's sake." Yili smiled faintly and frowned slightly. "I'm also a little worried about little treasure. This pair of father and son. They're really father and son." Usually they didn't find each other pleasing to the eye, but when it came to serious matters, they would have a kindred spirit that made people hate them. Prince Ding rubbed his nose innocently as his wife vented her anger on him. He decided to record this debt on a certain daring brat. Somewhere in a dark corner, a little ghost dressed in an inconspicuous cloth sneezed lightly. Someone immediately covered his nose and whispered, "What are you doing?" In the dim light, a pair of bright eyes appeared. Sorry. I think I caught a cold. It doesn't matter if you're unlucky, but don't drag Qin Lai down. Su Jirui, who was also dressed in cloth, said in a low voice. Mo Xiaobao pouted in grievance. I could have gone myself. Why did Qin Lai have to go first? Shut up. Su Jirui rolled his eyes impatiently. Don't you know that a gentleman doesn't stand on a collapsing wall? Do you want to be cursed by Uncle Prince Ding when you go back? Mo Xiaobao blinked and looked at Su Jirui. Cousin Jirui, you're being irritable. Su Jirui shot him a glare. He really was crazy to accompany Mo Xiaobao to do such a dangerous thing. Did this madman know how old they were? If Qin Lai hadn't gone first, Mo Xiaobao would have walked right into the trap and sent himself into the hands of a madman. Mo Xiaobao felt wronged. It was clearly Qin Lai who was too anxious. We already decided to change the plan, but he didn't even discuss it before running away. We still have to work so hard to save him. Su Jirui silently glanced at Mo Xiaobao. After a while he said, when Aunt gave birth to you, why didn't she just strangle you to death? Mo Xiaobao was the type of person who forgets favors and violates justice. Who did Qin Lai take the risk for? Mo Xiaobao laughed very smugly. He rubbed his nose and said, Mother loves me the most. She can't bear to. Su Jirui snorted and ignored him. When you go back and get tortured by Prince Ding's uncle, there will definitely be no one who will pity you. The Su family's little young master silently cursed in his heart. But little young Master Su didn't know that there was a kind of person in this world that was like a cockroach that couldn't be killed. The more they were tortured, the more they would be tortured. Su Jirui, who was completely oblivious to the fact that beside him was a little pervert in the midst of evolving, carefully crawled up, following the dense vines as he slowly moved forward. Right now, the most important matter for them was to find the captured Qin Lai, and not to bicker with the heartless Mo Xiaobao here. Mo Xiaobao, who was following behind him, rolled his eyes at the sky. Did Su Jirui know that he was the older brother? Although Su Jirui and Mo Xiaobao were still young, Mo Xiaobao was doted on by the Su family and Prince Ding mansion since he was young. However, he didn't forget what he should learn. And Su Jirui, as Mo Xiaobao's only younger cousin, naturally accompanied Mo Xiaobao to suffer. Therefore, little friend Su Jirui became the second person in the Su family to learn martial arts after Su Qingfeng. Although the two were young, they had the advantage of being taught by famous experts. Even if they couldn't beat them, normal people couldn't catch up. After a long time, the two finally moved to the entrance of the courtyard. Mo Xiaobao looked at the mark left behind by Qin Lai and asked with some confusion, "This isn't the Dechu State's post house. Where the hell is this place?" Su Jirui rolled his eyes in annoyance and said, "It seems to be the Zhao family's backyard." Zhao family? It's the Zhao family that fifth uncle said wanted to marry his daughter to Prince Ding's uncle Zhao Zhifeng. The one that even brought a group of people to Lishan Academy to find great-grandfather. Su Jirui said. Mo Xiaobao's eyes turned and finally revealed a strange smile. So it's him. Don't think that Mo Xiaobao only knew how to be mischievous every day. He didn't miss a single thing. At least, Mo Xiaobao clearly remembered who wanted to steal his mother's man. Although he didn't like his annoying father, he didn't have any thoughts of changing him. Even if he did, it would depend on his mother. If his mother didn't say she didn't want him, he would kill whoever dared to steal him. What do you want now? We're here to save Qin Lai. Su Jirui said cautiously. Mo Xiaobao looked at the sky. Who said we're here to save Qin Lai? If we want to save Qin Lai, wouldn't it be more convenient to let the Shadow Guard and Qi Lin come to save him? If Qin Lai is injured, which one of us can bring him out? Even if the two of them weren't much weaker than adults, they were still children in the end. If Qin Lai couldn't move, neither of them would be able to carry him back. I keep feeling like I'll be killed by you. Su Jirui muttered in a low voice. Mo Xiaobao smiled like a cat that had stolen a fish. Cousin Jirui, don't worry. Cousin will protect you. After we go in, you go and see if Qin Lai and the little emperor are together. I'll go and see if the Zhao family has any secrets. I've seen that Zhao Zhifeng before. With his guts, he definitely wouldn't dare to betray my father. When Mo Shuyao wanted to torture someone, it wasn't something that a normal person could think of. If Zhao Zhifeng was alone, even if he was given 100 guts, he wouldn't dare to betray the Prince Ding mansion in Glass City. If it wasn't for the fact that someone had something on him that he couldn't do, or that he had absolute confidence that he could escape. Su Jirui hesitated for a moment before nodding. Be careful. Seeing Su Jirui leave like a cat, Mo Xiaobao stood up and made a hand signal to the shadow guard hidden in the dark. He said in a low voice, protect Jirui. Feeling someone leave in the dark, he followed Su Jirui who had already left. Mo Xiaobao then jumped onto the wall with a smile and disappeared behind it. In the dark he asked in a low voice, the heir went in. What do we do? Don't worry. The prince said that as long as the heir's life isn't in danger, we don't need to worry about him. Another person answered. Right, let's go in too. I hope the security inside isn't too tight. If they wanted to protect the heir, they had to follow him at all times. However, it was much more difficult to follow him in secret once he entered the courtyard. After a moment, the place where they spoke returned to silence. In a dark study in a hidden corner of the Zhao mansion, the head of the Zhao family, Zhao Zhifeng, was sitting behind a desk with a gloomy expression. No one knew what he was writing. Just as he was lost in thought, a servant outside the door reported in a low voice, Master, Lord Li, Lord Zhu and Lord Wang are here. Let them in. Zhao Zhifeng suddenly stood up and said. Not long after, the door to the study was opened and a few middle-aged men filed in. The person in the lead smiled as he walked in. Brother Zhao, why did you call us here at this time today? Zhao Zhifeng looked at them and said, I want you to meet someone. Who is it that makes Brother Zhao so cautious? Today is the birthday banquet of the heir and princess of the Prince Ding mansion. Although we don't stand out, it wouldn't be good if we don't show up. When he said the word don't stand out, the man's tone was full of mockery. Zhao Zhifeng didn't say anything. He just turned and walked in. The other three looked at each other and followed after him. When they entered the study, they saw two children who looked about 10 years old lying on a soft couch in a compartment that was specially partitioned for people to rest. One of them asked curiously, Brother Zhao, this is the little emperor of the Dechu state? It wasn't that he was familiar with Mo Suiyin, but the dragon robe that Mo Suiyin was wearing made it obvious. Zhao Zhifeng pulled out a stiff smile and said, Look at the other child. The three of them looked at the child in embroidered clothes lying beside Mo Suiyin and couldn't help but exclaim, the heir. Chapter 1086. Seeing the unconscious boy in embroidered clothes on the soft couch, everyone was shocked. They stared at Zhao Zhifeng who was standing to the side in horror. One of them took a step forward in agitation and said, Are you crazy? How dare you kidnap the Prince Ding mansion's heir in Glass City? Just thinking about the blood on Prince Ding's hands all these years made them shudder. The Prince Ding mansion still had the shadow guard and Qilin that were everywhere. If Prince Ding knew about this, not only them but even their entire families and pets would not be able to escape death. Zhao Zhifeng smiled helplessly and said, How could I have the ability to kidnap the Prince Ding mansion's heir? Then what is going on? Everyone looked at Zhao Zhifeng with a serious expression. Zhao Zhifeng sighed and said, I don't need to guess who took care of you these days, right? Hearing his words, the three people's expressions changed. Zhao Zhifeng continued, He already told me, that's why I asked you to come here. The news of the Prince Ding mansion's heir's disappearance will not be hidden for long. When the time comes, the Prince Ding mansion's guards and Mahist army will probably search every house. When that time comes, I'm afraid it won't be hidden anymore. The three people's expressions were ugly. They stared at Zhao Zhifeng and said, Why did you ask us to come here for this matter? They were originally influential families in Dechu State, but after they joined the Prince Ding mansion, they were not valued at all. This time, Prince Ding wantonly appointed officials, but he obviously excluded most of the aristocratic families. After that, the aristocratic families fought over the empty position of left prime minister. In the end, Prince Ding gave the position of left prime minister to an outsider, Qin Xiufu. At that time they already understood that Prince Ding did not need them. Following Prince Ding, these aristocratic families that had been passed down for generations were destined to decline. Therefore, when Mo Jingli came to find them, they were quickly moved. Not only because of the benefits in future that Mo Jingli promised them, but also because they had to fight for it. Zhao Zhifang's old face squeezed out a cold smile and said, "Do you think that if Prince Ding finds out about this you can escape? Right now the Prince Ding mansion is looking for that person everywhere. If he is caught, do you think he will expose us?" Hearing this, everyone could not help but break out in a cold sweat. She secretly regretted agreeing to Mo Jingli's request. He was too impulsive. Perhaps they had been angered by the cold treatment from Ding Wangfu and the loss of the left prime minister's position. Would there really be a future for them if they followed Mo Jingli? But now that things had come to this, they had no choice but to turn back. Putting aside the fact that Prince Ding would never tolerate betrayers, just the fact that Mo Jingli had something on them, there was no way for them to turn back. "Then what do you plan to do?" Zhao Zhifang lowered his eyebrows and thought for a long time. He shook his head and said, "The little heir still has a great use. He can't be moved, but it's not safe in my mansion." Everyone looked at each other and nodded. The Zhao mansion did not have any secret places to hide people. If they left the little heir here, it would not be safe for a long time. "Then what should we do?" Zhao Zhifang thought for a moment and said, "We must find a secret place to hide the little heir." "Then what about the little emperor? With that person's temperament, I'm afraid he won't keep him." "Why don't?" "Not yet. If the little emperor does not attend the banquet tonight, it will arouse the suspicion of the Prince Ding mansion." Zhao Zhifang shook his head. Reporting to Master, King Yu of Dechu State requests an audience. Outside the door, a guard reported in a low voice. Under the eaves outside the door, Mo Xiaobao sat on the carved beam under the eaves. He bent over the window and eavesdropped on the plan inside. A big smile appeared on his delicate little face. After a while, a few people walked out of the study in a single file. Before leaving, Zhao Zhifang instructed the guard at the door to keep an eye on the people inside. He then left with the other three. Today, everyone with a little bit of face in Glass City was gathered in the Prince Ding mansion. If they did not appear, it would be even more suspicious. Seeing Zhao Zhifang and the others leave, Mo Xiaobao silently descended from the eaves. He looked at the two people guarding the door and frowned. His eyes quickly turned and he took out a small and exquisite object from his sleeve. He pressed it lightly against one of the people. With a slight whoosh, one of the people at the door fell to the ground. The other person was shocked. Just as he was about to call for help, his vision turned black and he also fell to the ground. Su Jirui stood behind the pillar with a cold expression and glared at Mo Xiaobao. Mo Xiaobao chuckled at him and pulled him into the study. Outside, two shadow guards dressed in black silently landed in the courtyard. They looked at the guards lying on the ground and smiled at each other. After a while, the two guards were moved to a secret place. Two inconspicuous men dressed in guard uniforms appeared at the door of the study. "The prince is in such a good mood. He still has time to train the little heir at a time like this. I think the prince won't even bother to make a move at this level of difficulty. The little heir is quite daring. He just forgot to clean up the mess." If someone suddenly came and saw the two people lying at the door, wouldn't they be exposed? Therefore, as shadow guards, they had to clean up the mess for their masters at any time. With the little heir and young Master Su's stature, they won't be able to handle such a big thing. The two of them looked at each other and couldn't help but have a thought. The little heir swaggered in so confidently. Was he certain that they would help him clean up? In the study, Mo Xiaobao danced with joy as he happily looked around. After a while he found many interesting things. The Zhao family hadn't moved in for long, so naturally there weren't many secret places. Moreover, even if there were any hidden mechanisms, it wouldn't be able to escape the eyes of a certain someone who had been clever and learned all sorts of things since young. Su Jirui sat on the soft couch and watched a certain someone rummage through the cabinets while frowning at the two people lying on the couch. Many times Su Jirui really didn't know how his cousin, who had only beaten him when he was less than 2 years old, grew up to be like this. His aunt was clearly gentle and elegant, and Prince Ding's uncle was also extraordinary and had the air of a king. However, his cousin grew up to be neither. Other than that pretty face that could still be seen, there wasn't a single moment of rest. "Are you here to see the two of them?" Su Jirui asked unhappily. Mo Xiaobao raised his head and glanced at him. He casually threw over a small porcelain bottle and said, "What's there to see? They were drugged. Just smell it and they'll wake up. This is from Sister Yunj. Can cure all the sleeping incense." After speaking, he continued to flip through the letters and booklets that he took out from one of Zhao Zhifang's locked cabinets without raising his head. Su Jirui wordlessly placed the medicine bottle under Qin Lai and Mo Suiyun's noses for them to smell. As expected, Qin Lai was the first to wake up in a short while. He wasn't surprised to see Su Jirui and sat up silently. After a while, Mo Suiyun also woke up. However, he wasn't as calm as Qin Lai and almost cried out. However, Qin Lai and Su Jirui both covered his mouth. Chapter 1087. Mo Xiaobao stood up from the bookcase and stuffed a thin booklet into his arms. Obviously, he had found what he was looking for. Waving his hand, he said, "Don't be afraid, it's our people outside." Mo Suiyun looked at Mo Xiaobao, who was dressed in plain clothes, and then looked at Qin Lai, who looked exactly like Mo Xiaobao and was dressed in black brocade clothes and looked more like Ding Wangfu's heir than Mo Xiaobao. He was speechless. Mo Xiaobao didn't care about Mo Suiyun's shock at all. He smiled and put his hand on Mo Suiyun's shoulder. "Good brother, thank you very much." No matter how stupid Mo Suiyun was, he knew that he was being used. He angrily pushed away Mo Xiaobao's hand, pointed at Qin Lai and asked, "Who is he?" Mo Xiaobao smiled and said, "This is not important. Don't they look alike? Like twin brothers? This isn't easy to do." Mo Suiyun looked at Qin Lai for a long time before saying, "Such a perfect disguise. No wonder Uncle Prince Ding could fool Genom of Gojoseon and King Li." Mo Xiaobao smiled and pulled Qin Lai's face. "This is especially hard to do. Normal people can't learn it." "I don't know it either." Qin Lai raised his hand and slapped away Mo Xiaobao's hand that was messing around on his face. "He's shorter than you." Mo Suiyun looked carefully for a long time before saying, "He's Qin Lai." When the word short was mentioned, the aura around Qin Lai's body immediately turned cold. Although his face couldn't be seen because of his disguise, just by looking at the cold light in his eyes, one could tell that this was Qin Lai's sore spot. In terms of age, Qin Lai was the oldest among them, but in terms of height he was only about the same height as Su Jirui. Su Jirui wasn't even 10 years old yet. Not being tall was every man's pain. Boys were the same too. Seeing that Qin Lai was about to explode, Mo Xiaobao hurriedly pressed him down and smiled. "Don't be angry, don't be angry. Little Emperor, it was a slip of the tongue. We can't afford to pay for it. Mr. Shen also said that you started martial arts too early and matured late. After 16 you'll start to grow." Being comforted by a little brat who was several years younger than him, Qin Lai didn't feel comforted at all. Su Jirui stood by the side and looked at them with his arms crossed. He said unhappily, "Are you leaving or not? Do you think this is your home?" Mo Xiaobao smiled and said, "Go. You and Qin Lai go, I will stay with the little emperor." "Nonsense." Su Jirui glared at him coldly. He had the demeanor of the second son of the Su family. Mo Xiaobao's face drooped. "Brother Jirui, if we leave now, how are we going to play when Zhao Zhifang comes back and finds out?" Su Jirui said, "Didn't you find something? Go back and hand it over to Uncle Prince Ding's husband, and he can come here directly to arrest them." "What's there to catch? I don't know which rat hole Mo Jingli is hiding in. If I run away he definitely won't come out. Otherwise who knows what kind of destruction he'll cause. If he gets angry and kills people in Glass City, what will happen to Exemer and Lin Er's first birthday banquet? Also, Royal Father said that we have to put on a good show tonight to scare those old men who don't know the severity of the situation. If the show is lost I will die a horrible death." Mo Xiaobao said righteously. Su Jirui rolled his eyes. "Then what do you want?" Mo Xiaobao took out the book and stuffed it into Su Jirui's arms. "You go back with Qin Lai first and give this to my royal father and mother. I will stay here and see how powerful this Mo Jingli is." Mo Suiyun didn't agree. "If you want to stay then stay. I don't want to stay here and risk my life with you." Mo Xiaobao looked at Mo Suiyun with a fake smile. "Brother, you're wrong. We are clearly on the same boat. How can you run away before leaving?" Mo Suiyun said, "I only agreed to cooperate with you to bring you here, but I didn't agree to accompany you to catch Mo Jingli." Mo Xiaobao's delicate little face instantly turned sinister. He grabbed Mo Suiyun's collar and shook it hard. "You want to leave after boarding this prince's pirate ship? Do you want to do it or not? Do you want to do it or not? If you don't want to do it, do you believe that I will shout loudly and tell Mo Jingli that you are working with me to trick him?" Mo Suiyun waved his hand away in exasperation. You lunatic. You don't want to live anymore. Mo Xiaobao stared at him with a slightly wretched smile. If Mo Jingli really comes, I might be able to escape with my life. But it's hard to say for you. I understand. Mo Suiyun gritted his teeth and glared at Mo Xiaobao. Mo Xiaobao nodded in satisfaction. That's a good boy. Stay here obediently and accompany me. I can guarantee your safety. How does the saying go? For a brother you are willing to sacrifice yourself, right? Aren't we good brothers? Hey, who's your good brother? If I'm your brother, I'll only be stabbed by you a few times. After settling Mo Suiyun, Mo Xiaobao sat on the soft couch and waved his hand at Su Jirui and Qin Ran. Alright, Qin Lai, come with me and change your clothes. Then you two can go back first. Qin Lai looked at him indifferently and said, I'll stay, you go back. Mo Xiaobao puffed up his little bun face and stared at the face that was exactly the same as his. I'm the prince. I have the final say. You secretly disguised yourself as this prince and ran out. This prince hasn't settled the score with you yet. Qin Lai looked at him indifferently and said, What is it that you can do but I can't do? You don't have to stay here personally. Other than not being as wretched and vile as a certain person, he wasn't worse than Mo Xiaobao in any other aspect. He wasn't older than Mo Xiaobao for nothing. No. He still wanted to see that pervert Mo Jingli. Lord Father told him a very interesting thing, he wanted to verify it himself. Otherwise it would be a pity. Qin Lai was too lazy to speak and casually pulled out the dagger that Su Jirui used to defend himself and pressed it against his neck. Go. Mo Xiaobao was stunned and wanted to say something, but Qin Lai pressed the dagger down a bit more, almost piercing his neck. Are you going or not? Mo Xiaobao was dumbfounded. For the first time in his life he found that he was being threatened. Moreover, the person who threatened him was threatening him with his own life. How ridiculous. You're not even my wife. Mo Xiaobao cursed in his heart. But the one wearing shoes was afraid of the barefoot, and the barefoot was afraid of the one who didn't care for his life. Compared to Mo Xiaobao, who liked to play tricks on others, Qin Lai was the one who didn't care for his life. After being stunned for a moment, Mo Xiaobao was finally defeated. He could only unwillingly glare at Qin Lai and walk to Su Jirui's side. Seeing Mo Xiaobao defeated, Mo Suiyun became happy instead. Zhen finally knows why you're so crazy. Because you guys aren't normal people. Coming out of the study, Mo Xiaobao saw the two guards standing at the door and wasn't surprised at all. It's been hard on you guys. It's not hard, it's what this subordinate should do. One of the guards replied seriously. He silently said in his heart, Little Shitsi, the best consolation for us is that you don't cause too much trouble. Mo Xiaobao nodded his head and said, Protect the people inside. Okay, let's go. Su Jirui speechlessly followed Mo Xiaobao. Even if this study is remote and people rarely come here, you don't have to be so carefree as if it's your own backyard. You're tuning in to the Biao's Wuxia Chronicles YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.